I left a message that if you don't take the $60 late fee,
Right ahead.
come in, just put a sticky note in the calendar.
Welcome to the June 13th, 2011 work session. Work sessions are a more informal setting to update the council on business items. No votes will be taken on work session items. Tonight, there are 9 items on the agenda. Public comment is allowed that is germane to an agenda item. If you wish to speak, you are required to fill out a public comment card and turn it in to the city clerk staff. Public comment will be allowed for a total of 10 minutes per agenda item and no more than 2 minutes per person. Public comment will be heard at the beginning of each item. Once the item is called, no other public cards will be accepted. City clerk, are there any general public comments?
No, sir.
Okay. Will the city clerk please sound the agenda item?
Our first item is discussion of revision to Milton's road privatization policy. Mr. Carter Lucas.
Mayor and Council, thank you. This is a continuation of a discussion that we had at our last work session. And what we've done is incorporated the comments we got from that work session back into our proposed revisions to the ordinance, Chapter 48, Streets, Sidewalks, and Other Public Places. What you have before you tonight, you have the proposed ordinance revisions as well as on the last page of the handout that I gave you, an overview of the process. And maybe that's a good place for me to start, just to kind of walk you through the overall process, and then I'll step through the ordinance as it's been written tonight. So if you look at the last page of that handout that I gave you, it's really a relatively simple process. The initial application would include the application forms as well as the petition filled out by the applicant. We have a preliminary council review, at which time there would be just an initial discussion with council as to whether or not the application was suitable to proceed. It really gives kind of the applicant an opportunity to provide some information but not go to all of the expense required for the total abandonment or request for abandonment without having some initial feedback from mayor and city council. Following the preliminary review, there'd be the formal application process and the submittal of all the documents necessary for consideration of the application, followed by the public hearings. The way this is broken out, for those that required 100% or achieved 100% approval from the community, and I'll talk about the definition of the community when we get into the ordinance a little bit, there would be 1 public hearing. If you were not required to get 100%, then there would be 2 public hearings. Followed by a resolution or consideration of a resolution by mayor and city council for the abandonment or privatization request. So that's just a brief overview of the process. I'll go through the ordinance at this point. And just to let you know that in this ordinance we talk about 2 things. We talk about an abandonment process and we talk about a privatization. That's really from a procedural standpoint. From a legal standpoint, there's no difference. It's all an abandonment process. But from a procedural standpoint, there were a few different or a few additional steps in a privatization. In other words, an abandonment of the right-of-way, but where that right-of-way or roadway still needed to maintain access to certain lots, that we included in addition to a typical abandonment process. And we'll see that when I get to that point. So this is a revision to Chapter 48. The roadway abandonment section of that ordinance, which would be deleted and replaced with what you have before you tonight. This first section really talks about the legal compliance and what we have to look at from a legal standpoint in consideration of these abandonments. And I think it's particular to note that in this first section, that streets belong to the general as well as the local public. In other words, when the roadway is dedicated to the city, they become the property of the city as an asset to everyone in the city and the general public at large, not necessarily just to the subdivision or the location where the street was created. So we have to look at it from an overall standpoint and not just from any particular subdivision standpoint. The second part of that legal compliance section talks about what has to be proven in order to consider an abandonment. And in this case, that no substantial public purpose is served by that section, or that its removal from the municipal street system is otherwise in the best public interest. So regardless of our percentages, regardless of the process we talk about, it all comes back to those 2 things. One of those has to be proven in order to abandon any particular section of road. So the procedure is, as we talked about before, the abandonment is made by, in the case where a homeowners association exists, we're asking that the homeowners association come in and file as the applicant. If there is no homeowners association, it's the case where we just have a roadway, an abandoned road, or a road may not exist, but the right-of-way exists, then any of the property owners or group of the property owners adjacent to that lot or adjacent to that right-of-way can file as the applicant. And also, council can initiate a request, or the Department of Public Works can initiate a request. The applicant, really, through this whole process, the onus of, or the burden of proof is on the applicant to demonstrate that either no substantial public purpose is served or that it's otherwise in the best public interest. And so the applicant would be required to submit his arguments for why one of those conditions is met. That would be done prior to any public hearing before mayor and city council. In Section E, the Department of Public Works will not support the abandonment of any road that connects to or more collector roads. We had a lot of discussion on this particular point. It's a point that's made in a number of other jurisdictions' ordinances regarding abandonment. When we look at our transportation plan, when we look at our comp plan, general engineering standards and planning practices, the interconnectivity of these roads is really what becomes important. And so when we start to abandon these roads, remove these roads that connect to collector roads and that provide those interconnectivity, it's difficult for us to support those types of abandonment requests. In this particular case, this doesn't stop the process at this point. The process would still move forward, but it may move forward with a recommendation of denial from the Department of Public Works. We would be looking at their arguments as to whether or not it's in good stead to abandon that section of road. If there is no road, it's just right-of-way, that may have some bearing. But at this point, Public Works would not be in support of abandoning any of those sections of road that connects two or more collector roads.
Can we ask a question now, or do you want us to get?
Oh, sure.
And you are, the department already has all of our roads classified, so it's real easy to, what's a collector or local street or whatever, all of our roads are inventoried and already classified?
That's correct. As part of the Transportation Master Plan, we developed a functional classification map that would be used in this determination.
Okay.
When you say connects two roads, are you referring to a single road that connects two roads, or are you talking about a path that connects two roads? Because a path could be multiple roads, either that, require turns or something like that, but there's a clear path from one collector to the other. What do you exactly mean by that?
That's right. It could be either one. What we would be looking at is the connectivity there. If you abandon one section of road where you may have multiple turns to get through, but you still provide that connectivity, then that section, it's possible that could be considered for abandonment. If you abandon that section of road and there is no connectivity, then we would look at that, even though there's multiple roads involved, we would look at it as a single path between those two collector roads. Then we would go on. All of these abandonments would be reviewed to be consistent with any of our capital projects, local, state transportation plans. The applicant then is required to make sure that they've coordinated with emergency service providers, utility providers, Fulton County Schools, the postmaster, just to make sure that all of those services that may be affected by a potential abandonment are coordinated with. Then we move on. One of the issues that we talked about last month was the approval percentage. In the current ordinance, the approval percentage is 100% required to move an application forward. After the law was changed and there was some flexibility or some ambiguity added, however you want to look at it, when we started looking at whether or not it was in the best public interest, I think it allowed us to look at a revision to that 100% rule. And so what we looked at last month was a table similar to what you see on page 3, where we've broken it down into a number of lots. It's a tiered table and a tiered approval rating. So 20%, 20 lots or less would require 100% approval. 21 through 90 lots would require 75% approval, and 91 or more would require the 67% approval. The number's a little bit different, and the lot counts than what we looked at last month. And what we did with this one was we took 100 subdivisions, sampled throughout the city, and kind of and looked at the number of lots in those. And so 20% of the lots, or 20% of the subdivisions have 20 lots or less. 20% of the subdivisions have 90 lots or more, and 60% fall in between. So that's where we came up with the distribution of lots on that particular table. And so one thing we wanted to note here is that even if you meet these percentage rates, that is no indication about whether or not abandonment would be approved for this. These percentage rates are merely one step in the process to move an application forward to mayor and council. So the approval percentage rates does not guarantee any abandonment request would get approved. Then we move on. All of the members of the community, and in this particular case, the community is defined as any home which has access to or is provided access by the right-of-way or the roadway. So it could be any home within a particular subdivision, or if there is a case where additional homes outside of that subdivision are included, could include those homes. I think in 99% of the cases we would probably look at it would be those homes within that particular subdivision. The applicant's required to notify everyone in the defined community by certified mail of the application to abandon that particular right-of-way, and provide a petition that meets the requirements of Table 1 in this ordinance. In item J, what we're saying is that even though you have a homeowners association that may allow for an approval rate less than what's in Table 1, we're going to require that the Table 1 approval rates be met. So even if your homeowners association had the ability to act on 40 or 50% approval, they would still be required to act on the approval percentages provided in Table 1. And then providing that all of the application requirements are met, the application would move forward to mayor and city council for consideration for a resolution for abandonment. And if that abandonment request is denied, they can't come back within 1 year for reconsideration on that.
Carter,
Yes, sir.
on Section J, are you recognizing that the homeowners association can conduct the vote and understand the will of its members? It has to do so based on its own bylaws, but you're saying that whatever the vote is has to coincide or has to agree with the percentages that you've laid out in Table 1?
That's right. And so we're asking that the homeowners association file as the applicant. They would do the work to get the petition signed. Everyone in the defined community has to sign the petition. If they don't sign the petition, it's counted as a no. But regardless of what their approval rates are, they still meet 67, 75, or 100% approval.
Okay, and that's why I'm asking this question, because the HOA bylaws are much more complicated than that.
Right.
What constitutes 67% vote of the members could differ based on the definition of a quorum, could differ based on the requirements for the type of meeting that it is. I mean, there's a whole bunch of things that color what that really means. Is your intent here to not actually address the fact that there are a set of bylaws that the subdivision has to, or the homeowners association has to abide by? And so therefore, if that is your intent, why have the homeowners association mentioned? Because I thought the idea that we brought up at the work session was where there is a mandatory HOA, the HOA's bylaws should provide a certain amount of guidance here. And because the real issue with a lot of our subdivisions is they're so big that, you know, it would be difficult to not govern them using some other set of rules other than what we put down here.
Yeah, I don't think that it's intended to circumvent the bylaws and how the HOA conducts business with property owners. I think what it's intended to do is to establish a percentage rate to give everybody in the subdivision to make sure that they have a voice and an opinion on this particular issue.
Okay, so just as a follow-up to that statement, you've got 15 homes in a subdivision that are part of the HOA that are unoccupied. They're owned by the bank. Okay? Does the bank have to weigh in order to vote? Or do those count at all? Are those counted under the quorum rules that govern the bylaws? I mean, what's your idea there?
Well, it's an interesting point. The way it's currently written, either the bank would have to weigh into it, or if there was an abstention or no vote from the property, it would count as a no.
Yeah, see, that's, okay. See, I think that the spirit of what I thought we had talked about last time was to provide the HOA with the flexibility of what its bylaws provided. Otherwise, let's not say we're going to have a mandatory HOA have any different criteria than anybody else, because it's this exact issue that is so problematic for homeowners associations. And as a member of one, and as it been, you know, served on the board, I understand what that really means. In a lot of cases, HOAs have difficulty gaining the opinion of its entire membership. It can only gain the opinion of those people that, you know, are concerned enough to show up for the meetings. Yet,
That's right.
We still have to conduct business, and therefore HOAs define what a quorum means, and they define what certain percentage votes mean based on that quorum. So I think that if we're going to address the mandatory HOA in any way, we've got to give the HOA bylaws some credence. So.
Well, and I think when we start looking at the percentage reduction from 100% to 75 or 67, it really tries to account for, you know, lots that you can't find the owner, lots that may be bank owned. I think this is not necessarily an easy process. Granted, the burden of proof, even without the percentage rates, is fairly substantial when we talk about the abandonment of these right-of-ways.
Yeah, but again, what we're really talking about here isn't the agreement to abandon. It is the agreement to petition the council.
Well, that's true.
Okay? So that's why I'm wondering why we're being so strict on what this really means and why we're not giving the HOA a certain amount of flexibility that they need.
Councilman Lenore, let me ask you a question real quick. We already have, in the case of a duly formed HOA, them being the applicant. Now, in your experience, to even be the applicant, to take the affirmative action to apply on behalf of the neighborhood, would there not need to be some approval process for that, or would the HOA have the implicit authority to do that on behalf of its membership, even without a vote?
I don't believe they would have the implicit authority to do anything. Something as important as this kind of a subject, they would always present to the homeowners at an annual meeting or at a specially called meeting. So they would be trying to get the will of the homeowners association members before they would take any action such as this. Now, whether or not they would set a bar, let's say it was just a simple majority in order to first petition the city for something like this. Maybe they would do that, and then they'd say, no, in order to really take the step forward, we would want to have, 75% or 66% or whatever it happened to be of the attendees at the meeting. In other words, of the quorum present at the meeting. And when I say that, I don't mean physically there. I mean there by physicality or proxy or whatever.
So would your, in a perfect world, would your thought be that the council, and again, you've hit it, that this is simply, whether or not the HOA is behind the petition to the council. It's ultimately your decision.
Right.
You could have 100% buy-in from a massive community and still reject it.
Right.
But it would be your thought, though, that this be reworked such that if the HOA has certain thresholds by which they can manifest the collective will of their entity, that these be recognized and embraced by the council, such that Carter, in making a presentation, says they provided us certified copies of their minutes and the HOA has spoken, and pursuant to their laws, they are in favor of it.
Correct.
What do we need to do?
That's, just want to get to what you.
Include a mandatory HOA? Does that matters if it's mandatory versus?
I don't know that there's an optional HOA in Milton. I think all the HOAs that I'm aware of are all mandatory, but you guys could probably fill me in better on that.
Well, there could be situations where there's no HOA involved at all.
Well, some of the older subdivisions do have HOAs that are voluntary. Now, you wouldn't do a subdivision without a mandatory HOA, but a subdivision that's 30, 40 years old may have a voluntary HOA, and it's more to make sure the plates are planted in the front of the subdivision.
Yeah, then I would
Anything
say
else?
that the word mandatory would need to be part of that, because you couldn't do this with 10 out of 150 homes that are part of the HOA making those decisions.
And again, I think we talked about previously the percentage or that the percentage of homeowners. It sounds like you're saying in this ordinance that the HOA would have to go out and prove and get those votes before they came to us, or not. What's your
No.
thoughts on that?
Before the initial hearing. And really, that can go either way. What we wanted to do is make sure that you made the application and you had the support of the community before we brought it forward for consideration. That could easily be part of the public hearing process as opposed to the initial application. But we want to make sure before we get into this that the support is there.
But
So-
the HOA doesn't have to know they have the support before they bring it to us for a preliminary council review.
Under this ordinance, they would.
Yeah, that's the thing that I was.
Before the initial application, they have to? I thought it was.
That's right.
I thought they didn't have, until they completed the application requirements, was after the initial council review.
So under
Are you
section,
saving them any expense of?
Yeah.
Right.
They don't need to me, they don't need to go out, I think the HOA ought to have the authority to bring it forward to us, and if we do a preliminary review and looks like they could get approved, then they can go do the
Then
work.
they have to
But
back
there's-
it up with the-
There's no need for them to go do all that work if they don't know that it's, and send out all the certified letters if they don't know that it's going to be approved.
Or a good opportunity to be
Right.
approved.
And if we tell them no way, then they don't need to waste all that time.
And I guess that was part of the discussion we had at the last was, it's chicken, the old classic chicken versus egg. And I think that, one, we
That's right.
didn't want the HOA to pursue a lot of cost and expense, but similarly, we didn't want staff to pursue a lot of cost and expense. And if I recall correctly, we also didn't want to give the presumption that in a preliminary hearing, when none of that due diligence had been done, I think we said that we really wouldn't be in a position to say that it either was a green light or a red light, because we wouldn't have the data at that point. So I do want to come back to that point, because I think we all were pretty clear that what we don't want to give is a false positive, if you will, is that if there's a preliminary petition, and that preliminary is simply based on an HOA acting on behalf of a whole community, that they might come forward to staff, but I didn't think that the initial petition was to come before council to say, is it possible? Because at that point, we wouldn't have the data to make that assessment. And so that could actually give kind of a false expectation that I think we wanted to avoid that potential risk as well.
Yeah, and I think we're hopefully, making decision A at step 1 doesn't require us to make the same decision at step 10. So I think the point was, given the applicants an idea, would we consider it? Would we listen to your argument for doing this? Yes or no? And I think we can make that determination, pretty easily. I mean, in other words, it's more based on, what is the applicant really asking us for, not asking for our decision, but is it worthy to discuss and consider and do some work on?
Is it a possibility that, if an HOA was the applicant and applied, and then it came through a process, then the actual vote or support from that community would be, the decision would be based on that.
Sure, we can move that. We can move that requirement.
So that way,
anywhere we want in
the
the
HOA
process.
goes to their citizens or their residents and says, okay, we can get approval if we get approval, X% or whatever, versus just going out on the front end, as we were saying, taking a lot of time going, they may not take it serious because it's like, well, we don't know for sure if it'll even
Yeah, and I
approved
guess
or not.
looking at your chart on the last page, Carter, nobody does anything significant unless the answer to box number 2 is approved. Okay.
That's
And
right.
approved is probably a bad word to use.
Right.
I think approved to go forward to the
Yeah,
next step, not
something-
approved
That's
to
right.
Something
stay.
like that.
Yeah.
But because it's at that point that both the applicant and the city spend some money doing a little bit of research here. So if it gets denied out of box 2, nobody spends any time or energy, or a minimal amount of time and energy.
Well, and we had a lot of discussion about that, and we certainly didn't want them to go to all the expense of preparation of plats and plans and those types of things, but we did want to, when it came to you initially, to know that there was support behind it, and it just wasn't an arbitrary application that was just out fishing for an abandonment
Yeah,
request. So,
and I think to your point, a lot depends on what the applicant would present to us to consider.
Well, that's
so if
right.
they came in and they said, yeah, we've got 5 homeowners here that want to talk about abandoning this road, will you guys consider it? And, oh, by the way, we happen to be the 5 guys that are on the HOA board. We can tell them, gosh, nice try, but that's not really what this is about. We wouldn't consider it just based on that. But if they came forward and they said, hey, look, we went out, we polled all of our members, and we've got a 98% agreement that this is something that they want to pursue. That's 2 different things. And it's part of their initial presentation.
yes. Were you agreeing with me?
No, but there's a subtle difference between that presentation and sending out certified letters and doing all that.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying. Yeah, I wasn't anticipating that the certified letters would have to be done prior to the public hearing.
Okay.
All we're looking for is the initial petition with the application that demonstrates that the community is in support of this application moving forward.
And when you say certified letters, what you really mean is that the members or the affected people have been given due notice that can be proven took place, and all that stuff, right?
There's 2 reasons. First of all, the certified letters is a function of state law. There is a requirement that all of the affected stakeholders, in our ordinance we call that the community, that they be given certified notice to accomplish 2 things. One is to put them on notice so they can participate in the process, particularly if they're against it. But then number 2 is to do this petition. So in other words, we can then give you the data that says X percentage is in favor or against it. Now, that's not required, the whole notion of I'm for it or against it, because you're going to have a public hearing. They could come and say that to you. And that's going to the issue you're talking about. I mean, the way this is drafted now, irrespective of what the covenants say, whether they're for it or against it is going to come in front of you as a separate bit of math
Right.
for you to know.
Right.
And that's what I think you're having some heartburn with is do we even need that if the HOA can otherwise follow their process and speak as a collective unit to the council?
Actually, I don't have a problem with, taking the high road and making sure that everybody received due notice.
No, I understand that.
Oh, okay.
I understand that. I'm just talking about the difference between the notice and then the vote. So
Right.
That's right.
Right.
Is there a way you can give people notice without having to do it's a certified letter, does it require a signed receipt or just sent certified letter? Because I know I hate getting certified letters because then I have to go to the mail, post office, wait in line on a Saturday to sign for it.
Well, Ken, we could go back to,
I mean, is there a way for
The
you to be,
notification
if you
with the petition.
attend a meeting, you can sign something and waive your right to receive it by certified mail so that, you know, you don't have to sit, everybody, for the whole subdivision's not there Saturday morning
It's,
waiting in line together?
the reality is the statute, which I'm looking at, just says after notice to property owners, so it does not say certified. Now, between you and me and everybody else in the free world that's listening, if it's not certified, it's hard to prove. It is all. But I agree with you. We're going to get a lot of them that are not going to be.
But if somebody has signed something one way or the other,
That's
then
fine.
you know for sure that they have received the information. And can you just send it to certified mail to those who you can't get to sign something?
That's fine.
can I,
I mean, that would be better than having to send out, 500 certified mail. I mean, it'd be a long line at the post office.
On the zoning stuff where we have to send letters out, are they certified, or are they just 2 letters into an X of radius?
Yeah, I think they're not.
Then I think that answers that.
And again, if you put something in with a proper postage on it, the law gives you a presumption that it goes to its mailbox and it's received. It just does.
Yeah.
Whether that's true or not, that's
I'm
the
laughing
presumption.
because of the pile of letters that go unopened at our place, so.
And I think the difference, if we go back to the earlier meetings when there was some advice from council, from staff and from our city attorney, that part of the discussion about certification was one, legal requirement or how that was interpreted, but also because there could be a financial impact on an eventual homeowner if a roadway were privatized. I think that's why there had been discussion amongst staff about a certification, and that there was a stronger requirement because that there was going to be a financial burden perhaps imposed by a particular homeowner. And
Yeah.
I think if I recall correctly, that was part of the distinction between just sending one and getting some sort of a signature, whether that be certified
Well, I mean, you can have
acknowledgement.
a form for them to fill out that states on there what it is, and they just sign the form either yes or no, and you just send it certified to those who refuse to fill
you
out one of
couldn't.
those forms.
Yeah, and I mean, from a homeowners association point of view, they're under certain requirements to provide notice for annual meetings and things like that. I mean, they don't always occur at the same time. Special meetings can be called. There's a whole set of, bylaws that cover how that has to be conducted. And it directly impacts the results because if you don't get participation in the meeting, you can't do business. So I think that, again, the required HOA membership is a little bit different case from a residential road that may connect a bunch of houses that aren't part of an HOA. So it's different cases.
Ken, what if we go back to the language that if you sign the petition, takes the place of
Yeah,
certified mail?
one of the verbiage that I think Carter originally drafted indicated that if you signed this petition, then you were relieved of the notice requirement. And to your point, I think if you sign a petition advocating for the abandonment.
As long as the petition states on it what the cost will be for it, then,
The petition probably needs to be on a form provided by the city, so it contains the right verbiage, so you're on notice.
Right. Yeah.
Ideal.
And then I think you ought to send it certified, because you're not going to, especially if property has been foreclosed on and all, I think you need to probably send certified mail to something to that address. But, I don't think you need to send it to everybody who's already signed it.
Makes sense to me.
Yeah. And the only reason I brought up the whole, foreclosed home is that, that has occurred in several of our subdivisions. And our experience has been that, bank-owned properties receive little attention. And they don't worry about it until somebody steps forward to buy the property, at which point they look to make everything right. So that's when they'll start worrying about mowing the grass and paying the HOA dues and doing all that other stuff. And until that point occurs, the banks are silent in terms of their participation.
To me, though, one question y'all have not addressed, and to me it's a big sort of a paradigm question is does the is, does the HOA speak for the community, or do we want to keep a tally of these sort of votes in favor? Because I'm hearing Councilman Longoria loud and clear, but we're going to need some guidance on that, because that's a big direction shift in how this is set up.
And I think that's a perfect way of wording it, Ken, because the HOA does speak for its members. I mean, that's the whole purpose of the HOA. So,
Personally, I believe the HOA ought to be able to bring forth the application. I believe when it actually comes time to approve it, the city has a liability and needs to see some kind of proof that it has been, that the HOA has gotten the required approval that it states.
And that's consistent with what we collectively had
But
talked about at
I think the
last meeting.
HOA ought to be able to bring it forth initially. It shouldn't, just say, hey, I believe we can get the votes and this is what we're going to do.
But at the last meeting, I think that the consensus was that there needed to be an accounting, because to Councilmember Thurman's point, there could be a liability because there's a financial obligation that's imposed if a road is abandoned.
yeah, and obviously, some people are parts of HOA and some people aren't, because belonging to an HOA is a financial responsibility from day one. There is no HOA that I'm aware of that has no dues, because then you're just signing up to follow a bunch of rules that you have no stake in. But what we're talking about here, and if anybody's ever sat through an annual HOA meeting, these kind of business issues are addressed in great detail, okay? The HOA budgets have to be approved, and the homeowner has to understand exactly what financial responsibility he's taken on for the coming year. And the homeowners association, their annual budget isn't a foregone conclusion. The members can turn down a budget because it spends too much money or doesn't do the right things with that money. So all of this is sort of immaterial, because if you're part of an HOA, you're making those decisions anyway.
My concern is that at our HOA meetings with 80-something houses in the subdivision, if we have 20 show up, and we've even gone to serving beer and wine to try to get more people to show up. If we have more than 20, 25 show up, then it's a rarity. So and I'm sure on something like this you would have people show up, but I just want to make sure that from a liability standpoint of the city that we know for sure, and I don't think we need to get anything from the HOA other than accounting of what was approved and what was but I think we do need to have something so that we feel comfortable that it really did receive the approval, so we're not spending more money on Kent.
Yeah, and
Well, don't let that now sway you.
so again, the HOA, and again, since I was on the board, we have to have legal representation at our annual meeting or at any special called meeting. We have to have people sign in as they walk in the door so that we know who's there. If they're not there physically, they have to be there. Their proxy has to be presented by somebody who has the authority to present their proxy. It has to have been executed by the member in a very specific way. All votes have to be recorded in detail in terms of which homeowners voted for and which homeowners voted against. I mean, so we're talking about the same
Well,
thing.
yours is very different from ours, though. We don't have legal representation. Maybe we got too many attorneys in our neighborhood, but we don't have legal representation at there. And our votes are,
Well, I mean, maybe.
After
th-
people
and-
ask
yeah.
I mean, Karen, you're bringing up a good point. All HOAs are not created equal, so maybe we ought to have a list of requirements that the HOA has to provide. In other words, at this meeting, you had to have your legal counsel present. At this meeting, you had to have a sign-in. At this meeting, you had to have proof of vote, either through proxy or, whatever. I mean, those are all good things.
Aren't we getting, though, a little complicated? Bottom line would be the HOA that brings forward brings it forward to the city, and then ultimately they have to confirm with the vote of the residents. But let the HOA be the applicant. But then, as we went through the process, by the end, then they have to formally have all the votes audited or somehow presented to the city,
And just remember, I mean,
rather than trying to decide how every
Yeah,
HOA
I
has
think the
to-
only reason we got into that detail, Joe, is because there is a very subtle thing that we're not exactly saying out loud, and that is HOA rules that govern this type of a vote don't require all of its members to be present and vote. In other words, if, let's just say, a quorum was defined as 60% of the homeowners being there, then a quorum would define the outcome of the vote. In other words, if 66% of the quorum voted, then 66% of the homeowners voted.
But I think what we're looking at, if you, let's say we had a 91 homes and above neighborhood, if you've got 100 homes, you've got to have 67 homeowners vote in favor of something. So that's a little different than a quorum or who shows up at the meeting.
I mean, you can't have a meeting where 40% of the subdivision shows up and then 67% of that 40%.
The way I see it.
No, you do. That's exactly
Yeah,
what
but not
the
in this
homeowners
situation.
association rules govern.
Yeah.
But not in the instance of road privatization. And that's
Because
what we'd
why?
like, because there's a financial impact and because it's a public road.
I think
Julie.
it's because the city has liability is why I think it is. Financial impact, yes, because we do a lot of other things that are financial impact. I think in this situation, because the city has liability, it doesn't need to be based on a quorum. It needs to be based on you got 100 homes, you need to have 67 of them say
I'm not
yes.
trying to say one way is the right way, one way is the wrong way. What I keep arguing is either the homeowners association governs the homeowners or it doesn't. Okay, does it govern the homeowners? Do we recognize a homeowners association as a legal entity that has responsibility and has jurisdiction over the homes that it governs? Yes or no?
I would say yes, but not over the city streets that are being privatized.
We go back and forth. How about, Ken, do you have any weigh in on that?
No, this is a great debate. I mean, and the points are good ones. I mean, I hear you loud and clear that they do speak for their homeowners, but on the other hand, you know, the city is looking at issues involving its municipal rights of way, and so they can't dictate to y'all what you do. And there's no easy answer, because there is a monetary component to this. And when Carter gets through his discussion about privatization, we'll look at the fact that every time whenever we become untethered to a right of way, there's now going to be financial obligations on those that are left over to keep them maintained up.
Yeah, and again, to summarize, that vote wouldn't be a determining factor in anything other than the information that the council heard, because the council is the one that has to make the decision. The homeowners aren't making the decision. The homeowners are only one data point in the presentation to the council. That's all it is. And so, to the extent that representation had teeth or had some weight, that would weigh in our decision. If a homeowners association came forward and said, yeah, 16 of our members showed up, but because of our quorum rules, they were enough to make the decision, that's who made the decision, our decision would be much easier in that case. Oh, yeah, really? That's all you could get? Well, that doesn't sound like you guys are very serious about it. So,
It sounds to me like sections I and J are the ones that are the most at issue here, because this is where we're asking the applicant to contact. I mean, understand the obligation to provide this notice is ours, and by this policy, we're sort of sending it to the applicant and say, you notify them, and put them on notice that we're contemplating abandonment, and then asking them to sign this petition. I mean, we could take that back internally. Now, in some communities, that's going to be a Herculean task to do that.
Yeah, and I think I want to interject there, because I don't know that it is a good expense of our resources. I mean, these are our assets, and it's awfully foreign to come into work in the morning and figure out how we can potentially give some of them away. So, I'm not real comfortable with it from a staff perspective of spending a lot of effort and resource on going and figuring out if somebody wants us to give our roads away. I mean, and that's just the long and the short of that. I don't have any problem if we can figure out in some manner in which, if the applicant's that serious and wants to demonstrate that level of contact has been made and that we can, honestly bring it forward to the council in good faith if the data's good, I'm great with that. But, to take a 500 or 600 person neighborhood and not only get that notice out, but also to get it in, tabulate it, and certify it, that's a whole lot of that's a whole lot of expense to the city. When the end result is potentially that we're going to give something that today we own away.
Can I?
Go ahead, Bert.
I see where you're coming from, and I see them as assets as well, but they're also liabilities too, because you have to maintain the assets. I was kind of thinking one way in our last discussion, and I thought about it a little bit more, and specifically in the paragraph J there, I think if you took the first two sentences, I believe it's the first two, and applied those to groups or neighborhoods that don't have mandatory HOAs, and then I agree with Councilperson Longoria. If you're in a mandatory HOA, you know what you should know what the rules are for them to be your single voice, and I don't have a problem with if you're in a mandatory HOA letting their bylaws dictate what happens with this. If you're in a non-mandatory or don't have anything, then I'm fine with table 1. So that's kind of where I'm sitting with this thing.
If we were to go that way, and again, I don't know what the council is going to do, though, would it be important then to perhaps, if the HOA gets to speak for the community, speak for the neighborhood, to at least know, have them provide documentation of who was there, what.
Oh yeah, no, I don't
there.
think. I think that
In other words,
sounds.
so
Yeah.
to go to Councilmember Thurman's point, or Councilmember Rosanna Bailey, if they meet the bare minimums to hold a meeting and conduct business, but it's some really low number, you could at least be aware of that fact
Right.
and say, wow, y'all are taking action legally, but it's not a whole lot of.
I would take it more than somebody just sitting up and say, yeah, don't worry about it. We got the votes. I counted them myself. I mean, obviously, there's if it's run properly, I would assume that they have some backup and documentation on that.
Anyone else have any, based on Councilmember Hewitt's comments? Or?
And maybe I'm not clear. I just thought that all along that there were two components. The first was that the HOA, whether it be mandatory or otherwise, was going, based on our last meeting when everybody was here, that the discussion was that the HOA could bring that petition forward, that they would go about the business of bringing that forward, that staff would be involved in that initial review, flipping to the back page, but that in order to meet these now lessened percentages, which is a lessening, because that's a big difference from what it used to be, which was at 100%, that for that second tier, that you had to have 67% or 75%, but in the larger subdivision, 67% of the homeowners, not just those that came to a meeting. And I would continue to support Karen Thurman's point about it's important that we get the actual homeowners to vote on that, whether or not they're part of the HOA or not. I still believe that second component is important, especially since we've reduced it from 100% down to 67%, which I think everybody agreed was a much more manageable approach. But it still ensures that citizens have a right and an ability to weigh in, and then I think it protects us from a liability perspective.
So
What if we moved the whole process of getting the signatures down till after a resolution was approved, contingent upon you receiving the signatures? That way the homeowners association doesn't have to worry about, going forward and getting all the signatures unless they know for sure it's already been approved, but yet they're still going to have to present.
That was what I brought up. I brought that up earlier, was allow the homeowners association to bring it forward, but then as part of the final
thing, it's
they have to-
contingent upon them.
That way they know it's approved, contingent upon the
Getting
actual
67%.
homeowners making that decision.
Well,
Well, I'll jump in.
Yeah.
I guess my only thought there is whether or not you would want that information as part of your decision-making process. I mean, I guess it's one thing to have it as if y'all can get to this level, then it's approved. I don't know.
yeah, but
a
see, that's why I
decision-making
don't
process.
want to provide the vote of the homeowners to be a acid test for approval. That's not what we want. We
Well,
want to
it's
keep
more than that, Councilmember. I don't think we can, because I don't think we can advocate our litigation.
No, that's my whole
Yeah.
point. My whole point is the more we raise the bar on this vote of the community, the more we're sort of giving up something of the council that we need to keep hold of. The council needs to make this decision. It's the council's decision to make. There's nobody else that can make it. And therefore, this vote of the community is a data point that the council needs to use to make its decision, nothing more. If we put too much, put too much on this, then we're giving up something.
And I look at it differently. As I said earlier, and Councilmember Thurman just said, ultimately, I think it's a citizen decision. And if, the homeowner association or neighborhood applies for it, and we go through the process and we make the decision that, yes, we're going to allow them to vote on it and make the ultimate decision. It's not us saying that they're, as long as it fits all of our requirements, we're not the ultimate one saying, okay, you can be privatized or not, because it is going to impact homeowners positively and negatively with costs and whatnot. But then that allows the actual homeowners and the property owners to make the decision.
I agree with that. I think we ought to just move the final vote down just below after our resolution, and then, the homeowner association can bring it all forward through everything else until it gets to that point. I mean, yeah, and if they show up and they got 500 homes in their thing, and they say, yeah, we polled 10 people that came to our meeting that we announced last night that was going to be there, we'll know that it's not quite as serious if they come in with, minutes from their homeowners association meeting stating that they felt like it was going to be, something they wanted to go forward with.
To me, it's just like a zoning application when we make decisions and then they have to bring in their final plans for permits. There are decisions that are made saying this is contingent upon you having this, this on your plan or that on your plan, or this approved.
You're talking about approval of a resolution contingent on
Yeah.
percentage approval from the HOA?
Yeah.
Well, that's just one piece of it. That in order to make that resolution good, they have to plug that box.
Mayor, if I may, what I think I hear you saying is that the table that's here, and to Mr. Longoria's point, it is a data point. It's not the only data point, but it is a data point that has to be validated, and it has to be based on those percentages of the entirety of what's defined as that community. And that community will be defined with staff's input depending on if it's a road, if it's a subdivision, depending on where it is. And so the definition of community might vary situation to situation. And that some of these are just as a function of the timing with the HOA bringing it forward. But then at some point, to the mayor and Councilmember Thurman's point, we do have to validate that citizens have weighed in order to arrive at those percentages. Is that?
Yeah.
Am I
I mean,
hearing
it could
that
be a
correctly?
6-month time frame, and that you could have had 4 or 5 houses, 6 houses, 7 houses be sold. So I think as of the time it's approved, it needs to be,
Validated at that
validated
percentage.
by a vote after we've already approved it, and then we'll go forward.
I don't care for that idea, but I'm just one person up here.
Well,
I
let
just
me
don't
give you an
think that's the
example.
right thing to do.
The law was changed, which is why we're having this debate now, right? That's why we're having this debate, because the General Assembly has opened up the abandonment law to allow now us to abandon municipal roadways so long as you make a finding that it is in the best public interest. And your motion to abandon will have to have a statement in there. We find is it the best public interest. If you make that finding, is the best public interest changed if 3 weeks later the homeowners out there vote no to abandonment? You've already found it's in the best public interest to abandon. So I'm wanting us to get on the other end of that. I want your determination of best public interest to be that's it. That's.
But we may find it's in the best public interest to abandon a lot of roads that go nowhere in the city. I mean, and in that case, we could just go around and start abandoning roads and making them take care of them. I mean,
And you know what? We're a little bit of pioneers. This law is new.
I mean, we could just say, okay, we want to just abandon all these roads and not maintain them because it's in the best public interest.
Can I ask this question?
But somebody has to petition.
No,
But the HOA.
not if it's in the best public interest. We can petition it.
That's correct.
But to Ken's point, and maybe this addresses Councilmember Hewitt's earlier comment, can't you then kind of combine those thoughts, and rather than to approve a resolution before, go ahead and the HOA petitions, we have staff review it, we give some early indication based on staff coming forward saying, you know what, this group has met A through D, or whatever those different points would be. The HOA then has some semblance of the direction of staff and council, but of course predicated on certain things, and that before it comes back to us with an approval, that they then go ahead and take that vote. It's still not at the beginning, but nor is it at the end, and that we then, in order to have that as a decisioning point, would need to know, do those folks that live within that community believe it to be in their best interest? Because in some cases, that collective community may not believe it to be, if the expense is too high. You know, if they don't want to take on the liability. I mean, it could be a variety of different things. Or conversely, they say, yeah, it is. But I would agree, based on the input that our city attorney just provided, that we would want to have those numbers before we had a final resolution. So couldn't we accommodate still, Councilmember Thurman, your point, it could still be a little bit later in the process, but maybe it still needs to occur before a final resolution. And I think that would address the mayor's point as well.
Are we all kind of, in a roundabout way, saying
Saying a little bit the same.
a little bit the
It
same?
is,
It's not
but
the exact, it's all semantics, but
But it's close.
it's close.
I'll just move the submittal of the petition to prior to the public hearing rather than prior to the initial review.
Or maybe prior to the second public hearing.
There's not always a second public hearing, so
Yeah, so it need to be before the
it'll
first
be
one.
before the first one.
Yeah.
So,
And if we can, just beyond that, I don't mean to interrupt you, is that, you know?
oh, no, that's fine. I was
thought you
just
were
going
done.
I've been interrupted a lot today.
I didn't know if you were done.
I was just going to say that, we could have the HOA submit the application on behalf of the subdivision. We can do the initial review requiring the petition to be filed prior to the initial public hearing, along with all the other documentation and information to support the case. Whether or not you want the HOA percentages and an HOA to act on behalf of the neighborhood, it's not unheard of in local jurisdictions around here, or use the required percentages provided in Table 1 of the handout that I gave you, really is up to you, but I think we can adjust this relatively quickly. Now I'm done.
Go ahead.
Personally, I like the table, and the reason why is because your HOA rules could be changed, and you could have a meeting that only 15 people showed up and change your HOA rules, and then have your next meeting to show that the HOA could act on a smaller percentage. So I really believe that we need to have a set table and a set standard just for liability for the city. And I've got something to go way back on page 1 once we finish all of this.
And I do think that's underscored by the fact that every subdivision has and it may be that Councilmember in Longoria has a very different experience than other subdivisions. And I think what we have to do is make sure that we're accommodating for the variety of different scenarios. I have my question, though, separate from those points, was going back to the notice. I think I heard, Ken, you say that it would be important for the city to create the notice to ensure that all of the correct information was included. And I believe that, Carter, you were going to be working, based on our last meeting, to determine what all needed to be included when, subdivision Olivewood sends out something to their community. What all does that notice need to include? And there were a whole host of things that staff had talked about. Not only, obviously, that it was being requested for abandonment or for privatization, but potential cost, time frame, maintenance, liability. There was a whole host of things, and I don't know that I've seen that within this.
It will not be part of the ordinance, but it will be part of the petition that goes out and the part of the package that goes out to the applicant.
And would that be our staff then that would be working on that? So there would be a required format that the subdivision or the gravel road or the roadway that those folks would send out, so it would be consistent application to application?
And we already have that as part of the current process, so I did not include it in this because it's already
Maybe if you
out
can
there.
just maybe subsequent to tonight's work session, maybe just provide us that.
Absolutely.
Because I think it's important that the petition state on there what the financial long-term liability will be.
And I think, too, what we had heard from staff was that the city is probably in the best position to help assess what that financial impact is, just because we've been maintaining those roads and we understand some of the liability that goes with the right-of-way and some other things. So not only would that petition include certain language, I'm assuming that it would include a methodology for how to arrive at a cost estimate.
We do. We've been working with a subdivision here recently, going through that exact process, and
And I think that just, it protects the HOA and it protects the citizens that are petitioning, so that they have so that there's not a line item that somehow gets missed, that later, if it gets then abandoned, that they go, whoops, we didn't know that we were going to have to bear that liability.
And part of the privatization requirements in Section 3, Item D, allows us to review kind of the financial statements and assets with the HOA to kind of go through those issues and concerns and make sure that they are looking at budgeting sufficient money in the future. Part of it is what's going to happen in the future. There's general maintenance, but there's also emergency maintenance, and so some of that is impossible or very difficult to anticipate. But what we've done in the past is generally look to make sure that they were accounting for some of those things and had adequate reserves to address some of those issues that could be anticipated.
Okay, Karen, you,
I wanted to go back to page 2E. And that's a pretty strong statement. I really believe that it should not be worded that the Public Works will not support the abandonment of any road, but I think that just basically, there are times that you may have, it may be in the best interest of the public for it to be abandoned, even if it is going between two connector roads. I mean,
how about you could change the word to recommend, because it's based on your professional recommendation or what staff thought, but that's
well,
not
it just
quite
seems
as
like that this
strong
is
as
almost
support.
Yeah, this kills it before it ever comes before us, and it's like it's a automatic denial, regardless of whether or not it's in the best interest. So I really think that statement is too strong.
Yeah, it wasn't intended to kill the application before it got to you. In fact, it wouldn't stop it at all. But it would certainly affect probably our recommendation as the application moved forward. So you would still hear the application, similar to a zoning application, but it may come forward with a recommendation for denial from staff.
I would say that it really needs to say that the Public Works Department will seriously consider, or something like that, not approval. I just don't like to say will not support. I think that will not support is just too.
You could say may not support, may not recommend.
Will generally not support.
Yeah, or will generally not support. I don't think it should say will not support, because that right there says, well, what's in the best interest of the public is secondary to the fact that it is automatically connecting to roads. And where we may see this more than any other case actually is on some of the gravel roads. If some of them decided they wanted to be abandoned or something, then they go between two connector roads, but it may be in our best interest to let them maintain them. And if in that situation, it's, they do go between two connector roads, even though they're not used that often.
Do we have staff got a kind of a general sense of the direction of the council on this? Can we discuss it some more?
Well, did we end up with that an HOA can file an application on behalf of the subdivision? The petition does not need to be filed until prior to the public hearing. But I'm not sure where we ended up with on the approval. Are we saying that the approval percentages should meet those as in Table 1, or that the HOA can actually act on behalf?
And Joe and you're welcome. Since this could be such a big issue financially, both for the city and for residents, I think it needs to be based on the table for the actual vote. The homeowner association could, based on their quorum or whatever, vote to bring it forward. But, that's my opinion. Joe?
Yeah, I'd just say that the petitioner needs to provide legal proof that they can make this decision on the behalf of its members. And I think we ought to throw in a financial proof clause as well, just to answer all these questions about differing HOAs and whether or not everybody's going to get notice and do they really know what they're getting themselves into. Why don't we just take that all off the table and just say, hey, prove that you can legally do what it is you're intending to do, and prove that you can financially do what you're intending to do.
Isn't this a little bit of a tap dance on the head of the needle? I mean,
Yeah.
we agree this is a data point simply for purposes
Exactly.
of council consideration only. What would be the problem with you getting the data point, as Councilmember Thurman and Councilmember Zonabella, you're talking about that Carter's written, but let's say, for instance, they can't get that. Let's say the data point comes in that it's 60% in favor. Therefore, that would ostensibly be community non-support under this code. But could they not also bring in a vote, though, of the HOA that is valid and binding and supported and say, look, we didn't meet your percentage, and we get that, but here's some additional data. In other words, basically put an accommodation in the code that says we will at least take that information for consideration. But you see what I'm saying? In other words, you're not turning them away and saying you didn't meet the percentage, therefore we won't consider it. If you don't meet it, that's fine, but if you have other valid binding stuff, we'll listen to it. Ultimate decision's ours, of course. Do you understand the point I'm trying to make?
And I think that would most likely occur when you had 20 homes and you couldn't get in touch with but 19 of the homeowners, and the other was owned by a bank that won't ever return your call. Then you may not be able to get the 100% because you can't get that one person to sign on something. But in that situation, you're getting 19 of the 20. That would give you that kind of flexibility to do it because it wouldn't have to have that one.
And just to clarify, didn't all the research, Carter, that you did and staff didn't the research, and I think also that we had some from our legal department, have certain benchmark? I mean, you had to have, we've reduced it from 100% pretty significantly, but I thought that all along that the intent was to make sure that citizens, even when there's an HOA, that citizens still ultimately have a right to bear and provide input. And I thought that, Carter, what you had indicated before was that other jurisdictions do have some percentage of requirement.
I didn't think you found any that were less than 100, did you?
No, but some do have a provision that if there is an HOA in place, that they can act on behalf of the neighborhood. That was the HOA provision we talked about last time.
Well, I think we're down to two different points. One, X% of actual homes, and one, letting the homeowner association make the decision. So
I guess my question is, though, is this drafted where if the percentages aren't met, the process stops?
If it said on table 1, it said recommended % approval rather than required, and it came to you from the homeowners association, but yet, if they brought in 51%, we could say, nah, sorry, we really want to see more. Would that work?
I mean, you could go so far as to say recommended, although if you're going to leave it that gray, if you're going to consider no matter what comes
Don't put anything
in,
on
I don't even think the table, because
I couldn't agree more, because the whole case is backed up by the data you present. If the applicant comes in with his guns fully loaded, then we're going to take notice. If they come in with a sheet of paper that says we talked to 3 homeowners, we will understand exactly where we are.
But I like the idea of giving the applicant, though, some kind of guidelines is what they need to kind of strive for. I mean, it may not need to be in this document, but they need some kind of guidelines to say, hey, they don't need to show up and say, oh, we got 51% of the people who showed up at a meeting, so we want you to go forward.
Because the reality is that if there's not a certain percentage, and if we're not clear what that is, we've not done justice. We haven't given the HOAs what they need to know what is going to be expected. I mean, this whole premise started with reducing from 100% to a reasonable percentage that folks could understand in advance and help to have expectations decided on. Because it's city assets that are owned collectively by
And the
by the
100% that was in the typical ordinance, that's 100% of actual homeowners, correct? Property owners.
correct.
So we're discussing dropping that down to 67%
In large
in a large subdivision.
I mean, it's the homeowners association is not the constituent that we have to
Right, it's not.
to serve. It's the actual homeowners. So I think that, we want to make sure we're not serving just 51%
I
of
guess
those who show up at a meeting.
My only issue, Joe, is based on that, what if it worked out, based on a quorum, based on decision, based on if the homeowner association had the legal ability to make the decision. But let's say it only ended up being 30 or 40% of the actual homes in there that approved it. That's putting a lot of financial burden and all on the 60-some% or whatever that didn't.
Hey, I couldn't agree with you more, okay? In the 12 years that I've lived in my homeowners association, I've seen the dues go up 8 times, okay? Now, I participated in that process. I voted on whether or not I wanted to see my dues go up. But the people that didn't show up paid the dues anyway because they have to. Now, to get to your point about, do these people know exactly what it is, what financial burden they're taking on? Because that's our biggest concern. If somebody takes over a road because it's been privatized and they don't have the financial wherewithal to keep up with the road, guess who's going to end up doing it? Okay? It's going to come back to the city, and we're going to have to take over some road that's degraded by 50% from where we gave it to them, and then all of a sudden we've got work to do that we otherwise hadn't planned for. So we need to just make sure that the applicant understands what the financial issue is and provide some proof that they can go about doing what needs to be done with the road.
I guess the only thing, to your point, and dues going up and whatnot, it's kind of based on assessment needs, but there's still, the homeowners are paying for the same thing they signed up for originally. Let's say costs go up to build a road, to fix the roads or infrastructure, and you have to raise the dues. Well, nobody likes that, but it's based on what they moved in and they had, whereas talking about privatization,
Again,
that's changing it totally.
I hear you. I would offer that the homeowner association I belong to doubled their dues 3 years ago, doubled them, in order to take care of infrastructure repairs and infrastructure improvements that we voted as a HOA to undertake. And that was no small thing. So
I would say that, and I don't know if we need to do a sales job. I think we got one idea and another idea, so we probably need to move on. But if we had an HOA provision, just to simplify it, they're not still making that decision. If it's not okay, if it's whatever their bylaws say, then it check, the road's abandoned or privatized. Like Joe says, it just gives us one more thing to make the decision on. If we ask a homeowner, a representative, when if they're pleading the case in front of us, and they say, get down to the, okay, yeah, like you said, 3 people showed up, and out of 900, and they all liked it, so we got 100%. We got I got a little sense about me. I can even see through that. I think that it's just a point. So I would like to, I'm going to say I'd like the HOA type provision in there, but I guess we're going to go which whatever the majority wants, and move on.
I just think your HOA is very different from a lot of the smaller subdivisions HOA, and I don't think they're near as well organized and as making sure they get the information out to people. And I would just hate for in a smaller subdivision you to end up with doubling somebody's dues that really didn't understand what was going before it, and knowing that the dues were going to be doubled for 10 years down the road, and the city ended up having to come back and take over a road that was in really bad shape.
yeah, and let's make sure we understand, this isn't about one subdivision.
No.
This isn't about one HOA. This is about the city of Milton. Okay?
But I just think your HOA probably is, because it's so large, is very different from most HOAs. Because like I said, I've been to HOA meetings. We hadn't had 83 homes in the subdivision. We haven't had 15, 20 people show up for our annual HOA meeting. And that 15 to 20 people may represent 12 homes. So it's just tough to have 12 people making that kind of decision. And no one ever, everyone's always good about going along with whatever the HOA decides, so it's something that costs them money and something they don't like, and then we will all hear from them.
I would assume that if it's a case as big as a privatization or whatever, there would be, that's one of those where there may be, just like our council meetings, there may be a lot of more input from residents who show up.
We've done a lot of stuff in our neighborhood that cost money. It didn't raise our dues, but I was surprised we had how few people we had show up for the meetings. So.
Again, I'll just say, my previous conversations and thought was that, it was going to be based on the number of homes. Now, I see there's argument against that, and I'm open to considering that, but, again, I don't know if kind of have two different opinions. Does staff have any a blend of that, or Carter, that would work? That yeah, something that there's a final, or if the homeowner association wants to make the decision and take on, but then would they take on the liability if, like in my example before, where it ultimately ended up where only say 30% of the homeowners made the decision? Well, who's going to be liable. We don't want 60% of them coming at the city going, hey, you guys voted to increase my dues 300% or something.
Is there a way to indemnify the city for this whole process? Because, I mean, that's what my main concern is, to make sure that they don't come back 5 years later and want to take back over a road that's.
Well, our current ordinance
Well-
provides for, before a road can come back to the city, it has to be returned to a state of acceptable maintenance.
But
So
what are we going to hear if they, if the road is not being maintained? I mean, it's.
Can we require a bond or something like that that would protect us?
Well, I think the protection comes in the documentation that we file as part of the abandonment. I mean, it's going to be clearly laid out to the applicant what they're responsible for, whether or not they realize it or not.
I guess
That I don't
Brian,
know.
I just struggle with the fact, and I think Joe Longoria, as opposed to Joe Loughlin, Joe, you make a great point earlier, is that we're making a decision for the whole of the city. And we do have a lot of variability in subdivisions. And we've seen roads that aren't subdivisions that have gone down this path. And one of the big issues was the financial burden that a lot of those homeowners didn't want to take. And again, this was not where an HOA existed. And I think it gets very unwieldy if we don't have guidelines that make it very clear what the expectation is. And I had thought that everybody, based on the last meeting, I shouldn't say everybody, but that there was a consensus about dropping it from 100% to a much more manageable percentage based on size of subdivision. I just don't know how we go in and say, well, we'll consider it, if it feels good. Or, I mean, I think that there have to be some guidelines, and without guidelines that are specific that allow citizens to be a party to that, I'm not sure why there's a resistance to having the citizens be part of the vote.
Well, I would say that if they're not, and I see where you're coming from, but just to take that to an extreme, if it's a mere checklist, then we don't even need to see it. I mean, if it's something that you can check the box. Okay, you got 67%. You got this. You got this. You got this. Why even bring it to the council and make it a decision? I mean, I think some of it has to be. You can't capture everything to make every decision in a document, no matter how many words or pages it is or how many tables.
I have to be very passionate about this subject, but we can't talk about it all night, okay? We beat this pretty hard already. I think that it's very apparent that there's two sides to this issue. I would like to get some feedback from staff, maybe if they edit or redraft this, maybe we can debate it when we go to vote on it and make any changes that need to be made at that point in time. But I think there's probably enough feedback that they've gotten from us to understand how they need to word something.
Well,
Go ahead, Steph.
we have. Although, if this is going to come back before y'all in first presentation for then your consideration, at this point, I'm taking away two different ways to write the ordinance.
Right.
So I don't want to give you. I tried that once before. That didn't work so well when I gave you an A or a B.
Can you make the ordinance to where it's very easy to interchange? Write it one way.
Circle.
I guess so.
Couple of pieces.
Right.
Insert piece A.
The purpose of the work session really is so that we can maybe get to a point that we can say, okay, Chris, if you go draft it this way, that's where at least we are tonight. Not to say it couldn't change again, but right now, unfortunately, but it's the reality is I'm taking away an A or a B, and I don't know quite how to do
one
that
other thing I
and
want
make
to
it
bring
work
up
well.
that I hate to complicate things in is if you got
Okay,
an
then don't.
HOA that's like the White Columns HOA, let's say, and White Columns actually has 3 different parts. Part of it's gated, part is not gated, and part of it is off Birmingham Highway, all by itself. How do you decide? I mean, is it the whole HOA that makes that decision, or only those people that are actually just in the affected part of it? Because actually, White Columns have got people over off of Freemanville too. I mean, they've got 4 parts of the subdivision that are all
and
part of White Columns.
There's components of their bylaws that cover financial decisions that impact different groups. Believe it or not, Crooked Creek has 3 different areas within Crooked Creek, all with different rules that govern them. So
different financial rules too?
Absolutely. Different dues, different services that are provided. So again, I hate to think that we would think that HOA bylaws are this willy-nilly little stuff that's written on the back of a napkin and everybody signs up to them. They're legal documents that legally bind homeowners to do certain things, okay? So all of this worry about they don't know what they're signing up to, it shouldn't be a worry. The people that are in an HOA know exactly what's going on.
Except for the fact, like my HOA, our builder had complete control until 90% of the houses were built out. So he could have brought it, after, 75% of the houses were built out, he still could have he had the authority to bring forward in the HOA stuff, something like this and privatize our road, and the 75% that lived on it would never have had to say so.
Okay, hold on one second. And to Joe Longoria's point, we've got 9 items on the agenda and got a long night here. I think what's coming out of this is that the entire council that's here is willing to look at this abandonment ordinance and changing it from what we've got now. Not that anyone's voting, but if I had to guess from what I hear, there's probably 3 people up here that are kind of going more towards the table, and 2 people that are going more towards the HOA. Now, if you want to, write the ordinance to the one that seems to be the majority up here are looking at, it can always be changed. I'm open to, looking more. Council, we've got 2 other council members that haven't weighed in. Council can talk to staff. They can talk to, get some feel, and we can always, you present the ordinance, we can change it or approve it or amend it or whatever. So. In order
I'm good with that solution there.
That's
Thank you.
what I think we need to do.
I have a quick question. Did this go to the Planning Commission?
Not as a change to the code of ordinances. It
Would that make sense to get them to weigh in on that?
I don't know that they have the authority to hear it. I mean, would that charter even grant them the authority to hear something in the code?
No.
And that, just to remind me why that would be?
Roads.
It's not part of the zoning ordinance. It's part of the
Right.
code of ordinances.
It's part of the city code, not necessarily the zoning code. And they're restricted to uses within the zoning code.
It's not a whole lot different than one that you're all going to see here in a couple of weeks that deal with brown bagging of alcohol at
Right.
like art gallery establishments.
just
It's
seems
not
that
part of the
the-
zoning code.
Yeah.
It's
And I
procedurally
understand-
not where it goes.
I understand that. It's just that it becomes more planning related because it starts to have to do with connectivity. So,
And I think that's addressed in the policy.
All right. Will the city clerk please tell the next item?
Next item is discussion of City of Milton strategic planning staff overview, vision and mission strategies. Mr. Sam Traeger.
Thank you very much. Jack and I are here to present a very brief presentation on the strategic plan.
You have 1 hour.
Period.
You have 1 hour.
We've heard that before.
So, just to give you an overview of what we're going to do tonight, we're going to cover. We're going to review our process, how we've gone about getting here. We're going to give you an overview and review the final report. We're going to up here and available to answer any questions you might have about the strategic plan. And our end result, hopefully, is to discuss any modifications that you might have to the plan, any changes, additions, deletions, so that hopefully at a council meeting very shortly, we can bring you back a final document for consideration.
Our core planning team consisted of members of the community and the city administration. Individuals were picked for their expertise and try to get as broad a swath of the community as possible to make sure that we met everybody's needs and concerns.
You've all seen this slide in the past when we've talked about the strategic planning process. This sort of tells you what goes into the systems thinking that Frank and Allison brought forward in our group discussions, where we started with the environmental scan, talked about desired outcomes and where we wanted to be, talked about key success measures and how we know when we get there, talked about current state assessment of where are we now, and talked about core strategies as part of this process.
We, along the way, developed a mission statement to coordinate with the vision. We also developed core values and core strategies, those being to build relationships, promote the equestrian lifestyle, protect and preserve open space, provide responsive government, and structure economic growth. We developed key success measures to track how we perform, which is something you're going to hear us talk about throughout, because we feel it's very important in the context of this plan, is to make sure that we are tracking where we are in the process.
This was a slide that Frank put together that I thought was very useful and kind of tied everything up. But it basically shows how this whole process is interrelated and how it relates back to the mission and vision. And that our strategies and our key success measures are all tied together and linked back to the mission vision throughout the whole process. And everything is sort of interdependent upon those key mission vision statements that we have as part of this process, and dependent upon the measures are dependent upon the strategies themselves as well.
Again, to kind of track our strategic direction here, we've tied together a number of strategies key success measures along with our strategies to once again track our progress. In each of these instances, whether we're talking about again building relationships, protecting and preserving open space, provide responsible and responsive government, promoting the equestrian lifestyle, or structuring economic growth, we are looking to track where we are through things such as satisfaction surveys, participation in events, and tracking things such as amount of green space acreage. Again, just trying to make sure we are moving forward in our process.
The final report that was sent out is divided into several sections. It starts out with a letter from the mayor and the city manager. It covers an introduction. On page 6, there's an executive summary that discusses the plan some more. Probably the meat of the document starts on page 10 with the strategic plan itself. And then finally, there's an appendix that covers other things such as our current critical issues, current state assessment, key success measure glossary, so we know what we're measuring year after year and we don't sort of change the game in the middle. And the alignment matrix that you just actually saw a second ago.
Changes that are included here in this final report are an addition of the mayor's letter, editing of the city manager's letter, an introduction which does include a historical review, brief explanation of why particular stakeholders were chosen, how the comprehensive plan, transportation plan, and other plans connect with the strategic plan, and also considered input from various homeowners associations, committee meetings, and so forth that occurred along the way.
We're going to be pretty brief tonight on this. So we're at the point of, do we have any questions from you that we can answer about strategic plan? Several of our committee members are here. Frank and Allison are here. Are there any questions about the strategic plan that you have that we can answer at this point?
Have we had much input from, people outside of the stakeholders and community members?
We have had several meetings. They were attended sporadically by people. But we did get a lot of input and feedback from those meetings, and we tried to incorporate as much of it as we could into our plan.
Was it generally pretty positive or constructive?
It was constructive. There were a lot of comments, a lot of questions. A lot of people brought forward their own issues, as you might expect. Those that really weren't necessarily covered by the strategic plan. Some of Carter's issues crept in from time to time. Lynn issues crept in, but as you'd expect, when they come to a city meeting and attend something like this, they'd want to voice their opinion about other things other than what was directly related here.
Sure. Okay. Council, you have any questions or comments?
I just have one question. Thank you, guys. Thanks for all the effort to date. Thank you, Frank and Allison. You guys know back there. On page 14, just we're under engage in proactive planning. And it talked about following the comprehensive plan, and then it said allowed density in areas not included in rural protection. I just found that a little unclear, because if the comp plan, and Allison and Frank, sorry, I can't see you guys. This was, I think, a question that had come up before, and I thought that was going to be modified or deleted or something, because I think at one point the question was that because that ties to the comp plan, this just seems a little ambiguous, because the comp plan talks about where density is appropriate and where it's not. So to me, that sentence is just perplexing, and it raises more questions than it answers.
We talked about that at our meetings, and I just interrupted Lynn because she was going to explain actually how that is related, and she was the expert on that area.
Yeah, actually, I think the intent was in saying that, you know, those areas that are not included in rural protection would be those areas that are appropriate for density, particularly those areas that are delineated in the comprehensive plan for density. Again, the rural protection area right now is not really defined, and so the expectation is that that rural protection area would include all those areas, Birmingham particularly, those areas where we do have some large lots, where we have equestrian uses, and like I said, I don't think it's out of sync with the comp plan. Obviously, the comp plan is still overarching the tool for use in zoning and other decisions, development decisions by the city. But the strategic plan simply says that, you know, outside of the rural protection area, that's where density should occur. Just, I think the intent there was to say that not where we're intending to create or maintain our transferred density, for lack of a better term.
And I guess
so, and it doesn't say that TDR, because that really is more of a comprehensive plan term and a planning term. They were trying to stay away from that jargon.
And I'll just say that I'm still confused by the statement, because to me it begs the question of how is it consistent with the comp plan versus how is it inconsistent? Guys, I'm trying to look back to Alice and Frank too. I just can't see you guys. So, I mean, you're asking for input. My input would be that I think that one statement could either be made to say that, you know, strategically we're looking to follow the comp plan, or that as we pursue rural protection, that density will remain in those areas identified in the comp plan. I just think that this is vague and a little ambiguous, and if our comp plan is indeed what's going to continue to be the guide, this was confusing. Again, I think it poses more questions than what it answers.
Okay.
So my request would be just that you guys evaluate that statement and see how we could make it perhaps more clear.
I just had one other thing. On page 13, under promote and retain the equestrian culture and community, it says establish infrastructure requirements. But to me, we also need to look at maybe some of our zoning ordinances and everything, and some of our, more than just the infrastructure, to make sure that we are really promoting and doing what we can to retain the equestrian community. Because I know they have had some issues with specific things of, you know, whether it's a horse farm, or does it have to have a turn lane, an XL, decel lane, and stuff like that, depending on whether or not it's a commercial thing. So I don't know whether or not we want to, if that's just all, if it's all infrastructure, or if some of it may be more planning and zoning, to make sure that we are truly equestrian friendly.
Karen, could you say something like establish infrastructure and development standards, or infrastructure
that would be
requirements
fine.
and development standards?
I think it's more than just infrastructure. I think it's some development standards in there too, just to make sure we really are equestrian friendly.
Yeah, I'd just say very good job on this. I think that a lot of thought went into this whole process. I don't think that there's anything here that is accidental. I think that you guys obviously spent a lot of time figuring out what key components really needed to be here. So I wouldn't provide you guys with any feedback other than, you know, if this makes sense to you, the guys are going to have to execute on it and make sure that it happens, then I think the proof is going to be. if you look at it at a high level, it covers every single thing that we covered in all of the pre-meetings that we had in trying to establish what the strategies were. So I'm good with the document the way it is.
Instead of see Rock City on the
All right.
roof, it would become City
Thank you
Hall.
very much. I know
Good idea.
you guys and the volunteers and Frank and Allison and all the stakeholders worked along a lot, saw a lot of hours, a lot of time. So we appreciate that and thank you very much. Okay.
Gosh, I'm going to leave the room more often. We went just to have a quick huddle on that first agenda item to make sure we didn't miss anything, and I came back in and they were
I'm
done.
going to ask if we can take a bathroom break.
Okay, sounds good to me.
I really didn't think they'd be done by the time we came out.
All right, we're going to go ahead and get started back. Joe stepped out for a few minutes, so he's asked me to go ahead and move forward.
And I've got a quick announcement for you all as you're getting seated. How to move on with these next agenda items. I saw poor Robin today in the hallway, and she was attached to a copy machine, making a series of copies for these next 7 agenda items for tonight. And it was going to make an additional set to go into your council agenda packets that are in front of you tonight. And we saved the paper, we saved the toner. If you would open up your packets, we did avoid a duplication. Every document you need for the next 7 is in your packet for next Monday's meeting.
Are we eventually going to get all of these electronically so we don't
Eventually.
Does
kill so many trees?
do we need to sound the next item, or just move on to item 3?
Yeah, let's move on to item 3, which is a text amendment to the zoning ordinance to create the film and movie media productions administrative permit. And this is going to turn into the Lynn Tully show, so here we go.
Okay.
All the rest of the items are yours.
I'm not going to even try to say that these will be brief, but I'm going to do my best. As you all, as you all may have heard on the news recently, there are zombies now in Cobb County.
Yeah.
Zombies, yes. Night of the Living Dead, Waking Dead, something like that. Anyway, some movie remake
of the
being
Dead
going
or
on.
something
There you go. Going on in Cobb County that was going on, I think, in McDonough before that. So we've had several film permitting requests. One as recently as last weekend in the city. We currently don't have a permit to handle those things. Nothing necessarily to really, other than if they're filming on our property, city property. We don't have a whole lot to protect either the homeowner, resident, or adjoining businesses or residents. So this permit is an attempt to try to do that. It is, however, I will say, very, very flexible in order to meet the needs of the film and media requirements, their industry. Their industry moves at a very fast pace, so the intent here is that we would turn around an approval very quickly, that some of the approvals might have contingencies, that there would be a lot of flexibility on the part of the director, myself, in order to allow these things. So, like I said, it's a little different because of the fast pace of this industry. We can go through the whole thing. I would hope that you guys would have been able to read some of it at least. It is a permit similar to a special events permit, but not exactly the same. Again, like I said, because it's geared for this industry specifically. The standards include written consent from property owners and written consent potentially from adjoining and nearby property owners if the filming event, the production, includes things like, demolition, fireworks, a lot of loud noise, things of that nature. Street chases would include, police cars. Like I said, this is it's a varied type of permit, so we're going to have to really be flexible. But I did work with the Public Works Department, Public Safety, both police and fire, as well as our staff regarding putting this together. So we hope that we've kind of captured all of those potentialities. I'm sure there might be a thing or two that we've missed, but we'll do our best to get those included as well. Again, this will be our first pass. I'm sure that we'll have a second pass as we start to see some of these permits move forward. But
I'm sorry about that. There was just a glare coming off a mirror in the parking lot. That's why I closed the blind.
oh, that's okay. Go ahead, sir.
Oh, sorry. Were you done?
Yeah,
Because I was just going to ask you, did we pattern this off of another city adjacent to us that maybe have learned a couple of things from?
I have. I looked at the city of Roswell. I looked at McDonough. I looked at Decatur and the little city where where In the Heat of the Night was filmed. What is the name of that city? Covington, thank you. Yeah, Covington. I looked at Savannah. I looked at places in the Northeast as well as out west in California, and tried to pick and choose the best items from each of those things. That's where the low impact and high impact distinction came from, such that there's a low impact media production, which might be as something as small as photo shoot, to a high impact, which includes, potentially feature films. So I did include those as best I could.
One quick question. It's my understanding that there is like a service you subscribe to, and it allows everyone in the film industry to know what your rules and all are, and you pay a one-time fee, or a yearly fee for this, and kind of helps promote places within your city. Is that something we're looking at doing?
There is. I have been contacted by a businessman who represents that, and that's a potential if the city of Milton wants to do that. It wants to join and participate in that. It's simply, I see it more as a liaison, basically for the city of Milton's permitting, such that they can outline and identify what those permits are. I'm not going to promote his business necessarily or detract from it, but there is opportunity for that out there, should we decide we want to be a part of that.
Would the fees from these permits go just basically to cover any cost we incur, or would we see it as a bit of a revenue generator?
No, it should only cover the costs that we incur.
Okay.
Not knowing exactly what all those costs might be at this point, we are going to have to set a fee that would be included in the fee structure, Appendix A, which I've not presented at this time. I've got an idea of what I think those might be, but I'd like to see us get one or two in to be sure that these are on target.
Can we include a requirement that says they mention the name Milton, Georgia? Because
Well-
the last movie that was filmed in Milton gave credit to Alpharetta.
I agree.
Actually,
was
that's
upsetting.
something. Yeah, that's something that we were going to include on anything that was filmed on city property. If it's filmed in the city, we could
I would
include
recommend
that.
that we do. I think it's a great
yeah.
suggestion, and I know that other communities have done that, so that it does help to promote, and very much like what we were trying to do in our strategic plan, is to promote what's great about Milton.
In
I would
fact, I
surely
think
support that.
our Parks and Rec director also mentioned the same thing, so that's something that we could include.
So we would include that then in this document?
We can include that and let them know up front on the application we'd be asking for that credit.
And Lynn, just as you talk about fees, knowing that we don't necessarily know what all those fees could entail, can you also include, an escrow account or something where they would have to put some monies in should the cost be more than what we first anticipate? As an example, if it involves a public road and suddenly our public safety folks are requested to help monitor, a roadway so that we keep our public safe during certain of these hours, I don't know that we can always anticipate what those fees would be. So is there a way to say, here's the fee structure X, plus some variable of Y, and oh, by the way, if you don't expend it, we'll return some of those, but just so that we don't get caught incurring costs that were not anticipated
Or add some unit cost or something like that for that type
for the unexpected or.
Yeah, the intent and expectation from public safety was that they would continue to contract for their services in addition to this permit. So that would be separate, and they do already have a fee per hour for that. Whether that includes all the facilities that they might need, for instance, if they need a paramedic vehicle on call all the time, at least during that filming, that would be an additional fee. But they have their standard fees for officers, for instance, that are on scene all the time.
Because I'm assuming that there may be instances where it would go above and beyond the resource that we have available, and so that might have to go beyond even what's available to the city of Milton. Because obviously we don't want to minimize public safety officers doing what they need to do anyway to go and monitor what's required for a film. But obviously, if that's a way to...
Let me just offer that I am a believer that the fees for service should account for the work that goes into, allowing the activity to occur.
Agree.
not terribly thrilled about trying to, keep fees in escrow or keep, I think we just have to be better than that on the front end. And, the fees such that they exist to be able to issue the permit should be one thing. Anytime you go beyond that, the public safety is a great example, even to the extent that road closures might be necessary, et cetera. Those are all fees that would be recovered at the time that that's decided it is needed.
Okay, it doesn't have to be
So I think
necessarily
you're
up
talking
front.
about two things. But I think the short answer to your question is yes.
I just want to make sure that we are covering the city and any financial liability, even for those items that we can't anticipate. And that's why I struggle with, is it escrow? I don't know what it is. I don't know what that animal looks like. But my only suggestion would be to make sure that, because we're new at this, is that, Lynn, as great a job as you might do, there may be some line item that you couldn't possibly have anticipated with the new film, The Zombies, over in, So whatever that line item is that we can't anticipate, just making sure that we have a mechanism for capturing those fees, even when we didn't anticipate them the first time. However we do that.
You don't want to scare people away by not having known what it is. I mean, we can change the ordinance after the first film if we decide that we're not charging enough, right?
Yes.
Well, we could even add, and Lynn could even add some language that just indicates that to the extent that additional city interaction is required from time to time, they'll be required to come and renegotiate with us for those amounts. Chris is not going to give away free police service to block off the road.
Absolutely. And that's my point. Is
regardless of how many zombies are walking around.
That's right. Amount of zombies.
Whether it's a full moon or not. In terms of things like lighting, and again, I don't have my reading glasses with me, but as I peruse this, I'm assuming that any lighting that would be erected, et cetera, that would be considered temporary.
Yes.
When they come into certain locations, some of these things are going to be temporary. When you mentioned the word demolition, if there was going to be a demolition involving any structure, I'll assume that would have to go to the DRB, or there'd be some mechanism so that we don't have somebody suddenly demolishing a building with
None
under
of our
film.
other ordinances are overridden by this one.
Okay.
Right. I would say that in my preliminary study of the fees, we're looking at fairly a nominal fee, probably no more than a couple $100, just for the application process. Like I said, simply to kind of get through that, see if that really does cover it. As far as, for instance, if it's a student film, I know we've had some high school films. We've had others come in who may want to come to do, documentaries and
think about that.
not-for-profit issues. Those fees could be waived by the city manager. So that's written in and considered on the front end. So.
Will you give it back to me, Bert?
I have one quick question, and again, you may have addressed it. As it relates to the noise ordinance, just knowing that sometimes these films, may bring about more noise, how does this contemplate dealing with that?
Speaks to it in the ordinance.
It does. One of the things that the Planning Commission suggested was, again, much more flexible than typical, in that it does allow for deviation from the noise ordinance with the approval of the community development director. But this is something that, if we include it here, we will have to go back and revise the noise ordinance to specifically reference that exception. And only, again, I think it'd be reasonable to limit it only to film permits and things of that nature, so that it's not that I could go and waive the requirements of the noise ordinance for anything, but for these specific types of uses.
And do you anticipate that would be something that would just be for the duration of the film? It could be for a month, it could be for 3 months, it could be...
Again, it would be very limited, probably with the requirement of that approval from the adjoining properties, the waivers that we included.
Okay.
So they would be notified, and it would be known exactly that duration.
And they would know about it in advance, so everybody would be...
Yeah, that's the intent. So,
okay.
Like I said, there's not a lot of big surprises out there.
Thank you.
I got to go watch and film, Keeping Up with the Joneses. That was fun. I got to talk to David to come.
You did. That's good. I think you should write in that Jason should be allowed to go and take photographs.
I think you should have a cameo.
Where's Jason?
Oh, it's not even here.
Oh, shoot.
We can open up information to all the stores for the council.
Okay, anybody else?
Thank you for pursuing that. I think it's a terrific opportunity for the city.
Thank you.
Please on the next item.
Next item is RZ 1107, text amendment to the zoning ordinance to revise the use regulations for the C1 Community Business District, Section 64-775. Ms. Lynn Tully.
And if you don't mind, I'll present 7 through 10 together, because they're kind of all related. Yeah, RZ.
You added another one?
Oh.
RZ 11-7.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
You had-
Sorry. I'm using the zoning numbers.
3.
Sorry.
All right, so we're going to hear items 4, 5, 6, and
7.
4, 5, 6, and 7?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
Again, these are related. This stems from the high-intensity uses discussion that we've had. The intent here is, as presented a few work sessions ago, to move some of the uses that are a little bit more intense from C1 to C2, to prohibit specifically certain uses that are traditionally mentioned in our prohibitions in Condition 1A of zonings when we do commercial zonings, and to create separation distances, buffers, basically, from those uses that tend to create very high traffic generation, that have high traffic generation. So, in going through that, let's take the first one, changes to the C1 regulations. The first is to delete laundromat and to include telecommunications facilities, and delete communications service, so that that's very clear that that's applying only to telecommunications facilities as a permitted use. To delete personal services, including barbershop and beauty shop, and to move the recycling center and gasoline stations with or without convenience stores to C2. Many of these, except for TT, which is gasoline stations with or without convenience stores. So many of these will show up again in the C2 regulations as a permitted use. So it removes several from C1 and puts them into C2, which is RZ 1108. And in C2, you'll see that we have deleted landscaping business and lawn service business because it's already mentioned in the C1 district as permitted, so it didn't need to be mentioned again, as well as plant nursery. And then we've added standalone personal services, including barber shop and beauty shop, bail bondsman, and laundromat. So those are all included in the C2 district. As well as, flipping the page, as well as commercial amusements, indoor and outdoor, flea markets and secondhand surplus retailers, not to include roadside vending, liquor and package sales stores, recycling center collection, and video arcades. So those are the ones included in C2. Now, moving on to RZ 11-09, we go on to prohibit these specific uses at all. So it's anywhere in the city. Fortune-telling establishments, massage parlors, pool halls, escort and dating services, tattoo and body art or piercing establishments. And each of these, I will say, and later on you'll see that each of these, and including all the C1 and C2 permitted uses, have a specific definition in our zoning ordinance. So that'll come up in the second to last zoning item. But we'll go through those definitions specifically. So before we get any further, let me go ahead and take questions before we get into this last one. Are there any questions on moving those uses in the prohibited uses section? Yes, ma'am.
Where would like a wine shop go? If it's not they're not selling liquor, they're just selling beer and wine.
They could go in commercial retail.
So they would be
C1.
okay, as long as they don't serve liquor, they can be fine in C1. If they serve liquor, they have to go to C2?
Yes. Yes, ma'am. That's the intent.
What about a grocery store that also serves?
They don't
have to be
typically
in-
sell liquor
Yeah,
under our ordinance,
okay.
but just wine, and so they can
The
be in
public
C1.
hearing, not C1
Yeah.
mixed use retail. Under the C2, there's some things that we've had some discussion about, some uses. We've had a discussion as to whether or not to address that now or later. Mr. Lagerbloom, is that something you want to?
Well, with respect to pawn shops, yeah. If we want to talk about it tonight, just very briefly, that's fine. Ken and I have had some good lengthy discussions on it. We might be better positioned to look at a more detailed discussion in July. I mean, he and I are kind of crafting our thoughts around it. So, we can certainly, to the extent that there might be a discussion as to whether or not the council as a body wants to prohibit them altogether, I mean, that might be worth a couple of minutes of discussion to figure out if it goes from one list into the next. If it goes from RZO8 into RZO9, I mean, that might be something we talk about.
Maybe we could just briefly frame
Tonight,
it, since
but-
it is obviously part of this dialogue tonight, and we touched on it at our last meeting. Two things, is that one, right now, pawn shops are shown under C2, and I think there's two potential approaches. One would be either to move pawn shops into a prohibited list where they just simply wouldn't be allowed in Milton. And there are some within the law enforcement industry that would say that's a good idea to help protect city citizens. The other would be, to leave it in a C2 environment, but to add some more language and regulations. So I think, to Chris's point, we don't necessarily have those two approaches delineated completely, but I would ask for you to begin getting your arms around that and just thinking about it. Because while we have it in C2 right now, we don't have any of these businesses, but I would ask and would like to help promote more dialogue in some ordinances surrounding pawn shops, but also the other component that's not yet defined. Under state law, it's defined, but just not in the city of Milton, that being the gym and gold mine businesses, which is really kind of the new extension of the pawn shop. And so there is some state language around that. The DA's office has been doing some work on it. To Chris's point, we're not going to make that decision here tonight, but because this work session included discussion about movement of certain businesses from one category to another, as well as prohibiting certain categories, I think that there are some that would indicate that some of those businesses do tend to promote crime, as do some of those that were already being prohibited. So I look forward to more dialogue on that. I don't know if anybody else on council or mayor, if you've got anything you want to share right now, but
Pass that along. Our preference, I think, is going to be that we regulate instead of prohibit, which I'm okay with. I mean, we're not, we're having a difficult time putting our arms around an example of somebody that has prohibited and what that might mean from an exposure standpoint. That we may be better with strong regulation, and then let the market drive whether or not one makes sense here with those strong regulations. But I think, is it fair to say that we're kind of leaning at this point, presenting something to you that's going to show regulation instead of prohibition?
A couple things. I mean, one is that you could put them in C2, perhaps make them a cut in C2, and
I'm sorry, make them a
have
what?
to come and make them a cut, conditional use permit, even in a C2. And Lynn and I haven't discussed this is cold for her, but so therefore they'd have to come in front of you anyway, especially and then you could layer them with conditions. And then, of course, even if they got their permission to do that, then we'd have a pawn shop ordinance that would contain another layer of regulatory control. So you're talking about 2 layers of additional regulatory control over pawn shops. Just a thought.
and I would ask that we also then think about not just, again, the pawn shop definition, but also that other category, which we haven't included anywhere, I don't think, in our ordinances, and I think we need to, that being the category of gym/gold mine or gym buying. I mean, there's a state definition for that, because what we're seeing out there is, of course, that these are starting to be commingled. And my question, just as you continue to think about this, Ken, is that when you say that you're not sure how we go around at least thinking about how we would prohibit it, I would be interested in how that would compare or contrast with those things under 64-395 that we do prohibit. So if we're comfortable doing those as prohibitions, how do we get comfortable with prohibiting those? how, because I don't know that I understand the difference. And again, I'm not sold on one or the other.
Well, ultimately, it is a policy decision. And then you're making policy decisions in those lists of sort of,
Questionable.
uses that we don't like. So, I have been asked the exact question, can we legally prohibit this sort of use? Yeah. I mean, I don't find that this sort of business entity implicates any of the sort of the constitutionally protected things like First Amendment rights, billboard companies, even adult entertainment, which has a moniker of First Amendment protection, is not the same as this. So we have the authority to do that, and you have, as a council, the authority to do that. Whether you should is what you want to have debated.
Right, and because I don't know the answer yet, I'm just looking at this other list: fortune-telling establishments, massage parlors, pool halls, escort dating services, tattoo and I mean, there's a whole list, and so we're setting a precedent by prohibiting some. I'm not sure whether or not that list should also include pawn shops and these others. Again, from a crime prevention perspective, I think we need to take a hard look at it because I think that there's evidence out there that indicates crime is promoted through some of these businesses. So I look forward to more dialogue. Chris, you had mentioned that the time frame, that there were some other options since we may not be prepared this evening with specific language, whether or not we would want to pursue.
Well, sure. Obviously, when we try to maintain the status quo, the way you do that is through a moratorium. So I guess, to the extent that we don't have something presented to prepare tonight that would start the regulatory process in action, I guess that I will throw that to the council, is we do have the option and potentially could do it next Monday night with the proper advertisement. If the council is interested in holding the status quo in the form of a moratorium, we certainly could work at moratorium language. I can tell you that there is nothing on, we don't have anything pending that we know about, and we don't have anything that we've heard might be coming in that we don't know about. That doesn't mean by any stretch of the imagination that we couldn't get one tomorrow.
I just thought when you and Ken had proposed that, I thought that was a reasonable approach, very similar to what we just did with the pain clinics.
And the pill mills.
The pill mills.
Right.
I will say that I think in some adjoining jurisdictions, there are some new applications, which is why I would just ask that
I
this
guess I'd look to
body-
the council to see if that's something this council would support, and if you
Whether it be a
support that, then
temporary-
we'll put the work into it this week to have something to present to you on Monday night.
Yeah, you could do, if you want to do that on Monday night, you can do it even without public hearings. What I would recommend is we do a 30-day moratorium, then we'll run the ads, and then we'll put into effect a much longer length of the moratorium. So the answer is yes, we'll do it Monday.
So I guess the question is just whether or not you guys would support a temporary moratorium specifically on pawn shops, and I guess the related gem and gold buying businesses while staff works to come up with regulations that would.
I would want to see what the definition of the pawn shop and everything legally was before I could support a
Well,
moratorium.
I can tell you exactly what the definition of a pawn shop is. And it is, don't beat me to it, man. I know you're
I take it
trying.
we don't
I
have any
am.
of these right now.
We don't.
That's right.
It means a business that lends money at interest
go.
on personal property deposited with the lender until redeemed.
Ooh.
I'd like to get more
So it
information.
means I go give them something, they give me money and pay interest on it until I go get it back.
Not counting your signature?
Okay,
No, you can give somebody your signature and they get money on it.
Absolutely.
That all of a sudden becomes a bank.
That becomes a bank.
Yeah, that's
Trying that.
So our options are to do it, to perhaps look at a moratorium, a short term, and then maybe a further term, or wait until here's some more stuff to go ahead and nip it in the bud in their July work session. Is that what I understood?
Right. What I hope to have presented for you in July is some recommended language with respect to regulation on both of these things. And there is a definition on gem and gold buying businesses. It's a little bit harder to define, a little bit harder to put that group in a box because there's some very legitimate jewelers that do just that. So that's partly what we're working on to have something to present to you. So that's an option.
Since this was just brought up recently, and you guys, I'd like to give you a little bit more time to do something and schedule something in July, if that'd be mine.
I mean, there was somebody at the Milton Market that bought gold.
Yeah, and that's a whole different world. I mean, there's people there that do a very legitimate business, that throw parties, that people, actually go out and find these people to come have a We Buy Gold party at your house as a social event. So there's that aspect of it as well that we just want to be cognizant
Some
of.
kind of warped social, idea.
I never would have believed it until that's, because we did a little bit of checking into who was going to be at our market, and this was somebody that reasonably reputable in that line of the world, and this was something that people did for fun, which, I
But when your wife comes back, goes to a party, and comes home with $300, that's my kind of party. I wish we'd get more invitations.
Better be careful.
Watch out, Ivy.
So I guess, the answer to one is look for then in July some language with respect to regulating both of these worlds. So I think I've seen everybody go this way on that. So the bigger question is whether or not you have interest in us bringing forward moratorium language on Monday, whether or not you'd support that. If you will, we'd be happy to put that together.
I just assume hear it in July and try to nip it in the bud in August. I mean, later in July meeting.
I'd rather learn more about it than do a moratorium.
Yeah, personally, I'd rather keep moratoriums for what I believe they were intended for, which is, crisis type situations, and you want to make sure you're preventing something. So I don't want to get in the habit of just doing moratoriums.
I have a question. With the pain clinics, did we have anybody that was applying?
We didn't have anybody that was applying, but we had some pretty good information that it was coming down 75 through Cherokee County, and it potentially would have worked its way here.
And I'll just
Yes.
say, and I, of course, respect everybody's perspective, the short-term moratorium, when Chris suggested it, I think the positive thing is that it would preclude some pretty obvious criminal-based activities that are out there under the auspices of a pawn shop. So if we're not going to do a moratorium, even though we don't have any applications right now, does staff believe that we can get something pulled together by July? And when would be the soonest that we could then approve regulations surrounding these businesses?
If we put something, the July work session is going to be the 11th. Depending on what comes out of there, if you're satisfied with it, I wouldn't have any problem putting it on the agenda and first presentation on the 18th. That's right, and it would.
Does it have to go to zoning, to planning commission, because it's conditions? They're conditions.
Yeah, so it's going to take a little bit longer.
Yeah. And I guess that was the reason for just
Yeah,
thinking about it.
I don't want y'all to think we can rush it and slam it through.
Right, no, that's
thinking
why
about where it has to go.
Earliest
We
would be
can't do it in a
August, September.
vacuum, so it's probably August, early September. It's going to have to cycle through planning commission.
Yeah. I don't think anybody's going to put in a petition to open a pawn shop in the next 30 days, but I wouldn't necessarily be against a moratorium. I think once you're aware of something, it behooves you to take action if you think action's required. But so it wouldn't matter to me. I could go either way.
It'd have to be at least a 60-day or 90-day moratorium, wouldn't it, in order to get the...
But what's Ken's saying is we could do a short one for 30 days, and then we would have to do more official advertising to extend it beyond 30.
That's right. You do the 30-day one to get to the immediacy, then you run a legal ad. You need to do, and before that one ends, you'll have another one drawn out for another 90 days.
And I'll just say to Councilmember LaGoria's point, I think that there's been a heightened awareness both within the police department, within staff, as well as within council, in terms of some of what comes from some of these businesses, and that some of the regulations that are out there in other jurisdictions are not necessarily precluding or allowing the sort of police enforcement that would normally be most helpful to protect citizens. And because some of our adjoining jurisdictions are seeing some new applications, that was why I think staff had thought that a short-term moratorium could be helpful. I agree, Councilmember Thurman, that you surely don't want to be in the habit of putting them in place. I just think that if we suddenly had an application without regulations,
Who has
we would be remiss.
applications?
We would be remiss for not having
Are
done
we devoid
something.
of regulation?
Well-
Or we just don't have the kind of regulation we want?
We don't have the regulation that
There are some regulations in the city code for pawn shops, but just not necessarily use and location regulations which would be why we're considering it as part of zoning.
Right.
I was going to ask a question just so I could get some background on who's applying here. Who's got applications in around here? I'd like to
giving it,
find
but a city of Alpharetta, I believe.
Alpharetta, okay. I just want to get an idea of who's applying.
That's my understanding. So obviously, it's up to council. I would support at least a 30-day, which potentially would give staff time to then put some more language around it. But obviously, it's up to the majorities.
Could we put it on the July work session agenda, discuss it then, and then if necessary, if we think so, in the next July meeting, do it, so we can have a little bit more discussion versus just this evening. But that may help get a little more discussion on it than in thinking and getting our arms around it, and then if we see necessary to protect interest before we can do something on the book.
My issue with doing that is I'm not sure, I do want to regulate them, I think, but I'm not sure that I'd want to exclude them. So I'm afraid, if you start doing a moratorium excluding them, then it kind of brings attention to it. And then if you go back and you don't actually exclude them, then, maybe it attracts more people to, that may not have thought of Milton for a pawn shop or something. If that makes any sense. So I agree with Councilman Hewitt. I'd like to learn a little bit more about it before we make any decisions, but that's just my opinion. Joe?
We do have room on the July work session. I mean, we've got one item on it, so if that's...
You guys want to look at it in July? Or you
Yeah, let's look at it in July.
Next week?
That's fine.
Okay.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and move on to RZ 1110, which are the separation standards for high traffic uses. As I mentioned before, we had some concern about certain uses creating bad traffic problems, particularly at intersections where we've already got issues. So what I did was looked at those specific high generation uses, which included freestanding fast food restaurants, restaurants with drive-through facilities, and gas pumping stations with or without convenience stores. So I looked at those and created a map of those areas where they may be allowed, and then put a buffer in of a half mile, which is in the blue, and a mile, which is in the red. You all may be familiar with this map. There's one for existing convenience stores and service stations, and then one for existing freestanding fast food restaurants. So, as you can see, it does limit their location, new locations particularly. The intent is that they would be limiting them from each other, not necessarily a gas station from a fast food restaurant, but a freestanding fast food from another freestanding fast food. So, the intent is a little different there.
Is that a biggie-sized drink and fries?
I think it is. Yeah, our GIS folks were a little creative there, but Chris and I did mention looking at the subway at Birmingham Crossroads where Publix is, but I believe that that's not freestanding, so that wouldn't necessarily be applicable here. So, well, no, it hasn't fallen down, but unless it's a freestanding, standalone fast food restaurant. I think that's the intent. Somebody might stop in for Subway, but if they've included a drive-through, so that's really the intent. And maybe we should say freestanding fast food with drive-throughs, but it's the drive-through that's the traffic generator.
Yeah.
That's really the kicker there. Because otherwise, our fast food definition would require separation standards for things like Moe's, Chipotle, anything where you're being served the food at a counter.
Yeah.
So, and I don't know that was really the intent.
Right.
So,
And again, the blue circle is a half.
the blue circle is a half a mile. The red circle is a mile. The Planning Commission has recommended the mile.
They recommend the mile?
They did.
Really?
Why don't we just outlaw all fast food restaurants and gas stations then?
But they did discuss it quite a bit. So, I mean, it's really.
I mean,
What do our neighboring jurisdictions do, or do
they
they?
don't do any of that.
Yeah, it's a variety, and it's not necessarily tied to the traffic generation. It's really based on commercial uses from residential uses.
So it's more just the
Yeah.
buffering, not within
Right. We're looking at it from a different perspective. It's tied to the fact that the more you cluster these things, the more you concentrate traffic in particular areas and potentially create problems.
And these red spots, particularly these ones in the inset portion of the map for the
Yes, sir.
for this area, the red spots are already permitted to have a fast food restaurant with or without.
The red
without
spots are
driveway.
potentials for fast food restaurants. They're the ones that don't have the caveat for convenience stores for restaurants, fast food restaurants, that specific prohibition. The ones where you see the little burger and fries are the ones where they are existing.
All
So
right.
this prohibits them from the existing, not from where it's potential.
And would this be, whether it be the mile or half mile, let me see if I can phrase this. If it does not have to come forward for any type of zoning action, is it,
It would still be prohibited based on that buffer.
It would be.
From the existing
so
business,
it's
yeah.
more of a business licensing type of issue? That's where you catch it.
Right, right.
But like I say on this current map with existing fast food restaurants, down in the legend you have a red thing, a red square that says parcels currently permitted for fast food restaurants. So if it looks like they would fit with either the mile or the half mile radius. So we, in theory, if we said either one of those, you wouldn't see any more fast food restaurants pop up along the coming highway.
Right. Well, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say New Milton.
New
Parkway.
Milton, right.
I wasn't sure if anybody else would know what I was talking
If you
about.
went with the half mile, there are a couple existing commercial parcels that would allow it. If you went with the half mile versus the mile along Highway 9.
Okay.
Now that is not to say that you couldn't rezone and ask specifically for fast food. As long as you're not within whichever buffer you pick, you could ask for that.
But in answer to your question, it pretty much, I mean, to adopt either one of the two of these is basically saying no more fast food in New Milton Parkway.
Isn't that a direct conflict with part of our comprehensive plan, which is to, encourage some kind of economic growth? And here we're trying to, we've got the plan and now we're going to start limiting and not allow anything in the city?
It seems like that, since we have limited area that's where that type of development is possibly the right place, that you're really, essentially taking it away.
And I might have just missed it when you said it earlier, Lynn, so I apologize. But the rationale for the half mile and the mile came from where?
Again, like I said, we had to kind of pick a number. What would be reasonable to keep them from clustering all right next to each other. So I mean, we picked half mile and a mile as a for instance. It could be any variation in between, above or below. But the intent is to try to keep keep those businesses from clustering in such proximity that they cause problems on our already congested intersections.
Well, with it being a traffic issue, would it perhaps be reasonable to look at it as instead of and I don't know if it's even possible, but instead of looking at it in a radius as a road miles or whatever, to get there that
Linear as opposed to.
But aren't you better off sometimes clustering them so that if you, especially if you have access between each other like you do at Walmart, when you have them all there together, it's much easier to have them in that one section, being able to get to them from an interior rather than having them, one every half mile down the road and you got people coming in and out all the time.
The other thing I think that is the problem, not problem, good thing for Milton is we have such small amount of commercial areas that if we start spreading it out, then, we're really probably doing ourselves harm, because it's not like we have a lot of commercial area and you can spread them out a mile away or half a mile, but we only got a few select areas, and then we're kind of pushing business away in those areas.
Yeah. The other approach is that, yes, you cluster them and require connectivity, several forms of alternative connectivity, so there might be several different entrances and exits provided through even private driveways.
But, and these were originally, though, I mean, it's not all commercial business. It's specifically just fast food restaurants and convenience stores, right, or gas stations. I mean, if I'm recalling the original intent, it was just to make sure that you didn't, as an example, end up with 4 gas stations on all 4 corners of an area, or that you didn't end up with Wendy's and Burger King and McDonald's and everything clustered right together, because there were some that felt that those were of a higher intensity use. I mean, so it wasn't trying to, I don't think, that the intent was originally to prohibit all of those. It was just to make sure that you didn't have, you know, Bethany Bend with the gas station on one corner and suddenly another on the other corner. Isn't that where that originally kind of came from?
Actually, it stems all the way back to creating some sort of separation requirement from these higher intensity uses from residential uses. So, you know, and in trying to define, right, but in trying to define what the real concerns were about locating those, it really came down to traffic and creating additional traffic, particularly on congested intersections. And so that's how we kind of got to the separation standard. I'm not saying it's perfect. I'm not saying, I'm hoping that it will do what we think it will do. It is, again, a little bit of a pioneer in that I don't think anybody else has anything similar to this, but, you know, if this is not the way you want to go, then we can look for something else.
I don't necessarily want to be a pioneer when we have a limited commercial area and the current economy and whatnot. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I'd much rather it require some kind of connectivity. I mean, what we're truly trying to do is to keep the roads from backing up. I think that this isn't what this is accomplishing. And this could actually add to our traffic situations rather than helping the situation. So, and I mean, where does something like Starbucks fit into this? Because it's a restaurant with a drive-through facility.
Right. It would have to have the buffer.
Yeah, this is a little too much against business for me. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I would agree with that. In this form.
Yeah, it's.
Okay.
I guess my question is then, do we want to see this come back in a different form, or is this just out of the question?
We're still trying to figure out a way, if we can figure out one, to solve the question we were at initially, which was you know, some high-intensity uses adjacent to residential. I mean, that's what all these are steps in trying to fix.
Right.
But, you know, I guess to Lynn's point, that's a good question, is, you know, do we still want to?
I'd rather address that with just a distance between residents.
Yeah, I mean.
Residential from a commercial use.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd rather see you can't have a drive-through within a certain distance of a residential zone property, or a gas station, or a gas pump within a certain distance, if that's what we're trying to do, rather than not allowing them to be next to each other.
So if you had like a commercial or mixed-use district, and then you had AG1 next to it, saying that that you couldn't have one of these two businesses within 400 feet of that type of district?
Yeah.
Or something?
I'd rather see something, if that's what we're trying to accomplish, I'd rather see that than I would, you know, not allow.
100 feet, 50 feet. I mean,
Yeah.
you know,
I just,
Whatever the number is.
I mean, 50 is probably not enough, because 50 was the situation, or closer, where the objections from citizens came up.
Okay.
Joe,
Well, I will try it again.
No, I agree.
Okay. Now, understand, just because we're hearing this tonight work session, this is still published on the
Still on
zoning
the
agenda,
agenda.
so we're still going to have to sound it next week and hear it, and y'all probably have to do this again, but.
Would we just want to look at deferring it or voting?
If this is just downright out of the question, I don't want to tell you how to vote, but I
Yeah.
would rather you just deny this next week to
Right.
give it an official end, so that we can then take a different stand.
And just before we move on, I mean, Lynn, what was your perspective? Obviously, you and Robin and others have been working on this. You heard what the original concern was from citizens in some of those earlier zonings. I mean, I'm interested in your professional perspective. What do you think?
I think we're closer now in that we have identified what we really think, as far as which uses we really think are a problem. I tried to identify them by traffic, but I think that what I'm hearing is that it's the same uses. So it's things with drive-throughs and gas stations with or without convenience stores. These things that are creating more traffic and therefore being higher or maybe even highest intensity. I think we're further along because we've at least defined more than just the gas station issue. When we originally tried to get to this, we were limiting it only to gas stations, and I think that we've enlarged the scope enough without being, overly regulatory. So I'll come back to you. We'll see what we can do to come up with a reasonable buffer, and we'll take it from residential districts
Okay.
or uses.
All right.
Okay. All right, the next one amends the definitions section of the zoning ordinance. Again, this includes all those definitions for the prohibited uses that were listed, as well as anything that was not originally included that was a specifically permitted use in either C1 or C2. So if we'll just go through the pages very quickly, I'll show you what we have done here. On page 3, we included art galleries and assembly halls, specific definitions for automobile and truck leasing and sales, and a reference to automotive parking lots. On page 4, bail bondsman, which is directly from our current ordinance, our city code ordinance, identifying bail bondsmen and who those are. We included body art or piercing under tattoo and body art, so you'll see that a little bit later. If you move on to page 6, we've included catering and carry out or delivery of prepared foods. In number 7, we also included commercial vehicle, which is something that came from the Planning Commission and the landscaping business discussion as to what is a commercial vehicle. So they've included that, as well as the Planning Commission also recommended we put in a definition for commercial equipment, which you will see as well. Page 9, delicatessen has been added. Page 10, drive-in theater was added. And 11 includes our escort and dating services definition. Page 12 includes a definition for financial establishment and a definition for flea market and secondhand surplus retailers. Page 17 includes fortune-telling establishment definition, as well as funeral home, automobile repair garage, and gasoline station. So that's clarified. 18 includes gymnasium. 19 includes health club and spa. And then we've got to skip a couple of pages to 22. We've included your recent approval for the landscape business definition is included here, as well as laundromat, laundry and dry cleaning plant distribution center, laundry and dry cleaning shop, and lawn service business. So, page 24 includes a definition for massage parlor. I would point out that we use the word principal businesses to practice massage, non-medical or non-surgical. And so that's to differentiate from those places that are spa, or that might, do hair and have, a massage as well.
Legitimate massages is what you're saying?
Yes, sir. We included a definition for millinery, which, believe it or not, is still an approved use in our zoning code. Page 25, mortuary, and one for museum. Page 26, permanent office, and package sales store. Please note the package. There were a lot of these that weren't included, so we've put them all in. The package sales store definition also comes from our alcohol ordinance, so it's been coordinated there. We refined our parking lot to include surfaced and improved lots that may include a parking garage or a multi-story facility for parking. Personal services standalone, which are those buildings specifically designed and used for providing personal grooming and hygiene services. So that would cover your standalone nail salons, hair salons that are typically included in the condition 1A of a commercial zoning. Pet grooming, photography studio is also included on page 27. Page 28, we've got plumbing shop, pool halls, and printing shop. And page 29, radio and television station, which includes not only your antennas and transmitters, but the actual station and broadcasting organizations and studios. All right, we're almost there. There are only 39 pages. We're on 30. So on 30, there is also a repair shop, which typically is going to apply to small appliances, electronics, small motors. Research laboratory. Page 31, School of Business, Music, or Dance, which includes educational institutions devoted to a specific field of learning. Then we've got several pages. It's getting better. And we get to page 36, which includes tattoo and body art or piercing establishment. Again, I use the word principal business or activity so that those folks who are preparing tattoos as part of cosmetics, as women do fairly routinely, as I understand it, have makeup and cosmetic items tattooed or whatever. Those can be allowed within other venues. So I'm just yeah.
Chris will talk about it.
I do the eyeliner. A lot of times now it's a real popular thing is to have the eyeliner tattooed.
Lip liner, yeah.
Nothing good can come from that discussion.
Exactly.
Anyway, so
Probably not.
moving on, there's also theater included as well as a tinsmithing shop.
I need one of those.
And finally, on page 38, we have included the definition for video arcade. I know that there are a lot of definitions in here, and you may or may not have had a chance to go through them all for questions, but please let me know what questions jump out at you.
Wow.
Yes,
So
sir.
by this definition, Montana's is a video arcade.
I don't know. What does Montana's have in it?
It's got like
Other than
8
food.
video machines.
If you have more than 5 coin-operated or self-service bona fide amusement games, believe it or not, all of those have to be registered according to state law. So if they have more than 5, they're considered an arcade.
I'm okay. I only have 3 at my house.
Reading glasses.
Lynn, just a question.
I don't have 3. I got 3 pinball
We
machines.
ought to think about a definition of spa to differentiate it from massage parlor. Just curious. I just
Yeah.
I just noted it.
One of friends of mine does.
Huh?
Yeah. I thought about that too, and I almost would rather leave it a little bit more open for interpretation. We've got health club and health spa in here.
Well, Lynn, the reason I brought it up, I mean, in some cases we say whose primary business is. I mean, you can't go to Montana's and think for a second that it's a video arcade.
Right.
Okay? It's a restaurant. It's a bar. Okay? If you want to talk about what its primary business purpose is to serve alcohol and serve food. That's it.
In that order?
The
Yeah.
arcade, probably. The arcade is there for a completely different reason. And even though there's more than 5 of them, from a square footage point of view, it's a very small part of the footprint. So how do we, I don't want to get more confusing, but how do we make sure that somebody doesn't get confused and think Montana's is a video arcade?
Well, you're saying according to the state, he is.
That's what I'm,
Yeah.
yeah. So
So that might
And I'm-
open up an issue if we.
that's what I'm
Yeah.
saying. That may open up.
Stay.
This looks like
Yeah.
this is controlled
Well,
in,
they've got
in,
to. They regulate them, and I'm trying to remember if they had the number 5 or if I had the number
Can you
5.
look up 161235D?
Can you look it up faster than I can on my little phone? Thank you.
Shoot, the Shell station I stopped to get gas has 5 arcade video machines in it.
That's an Alpharetta.
No, that's in history.
161235D.
All right, we don't need to dwell on that.
But I guess the point is, do we open up a can of worms for ourselves by doing that?
There are a few of them. You know, the massage thing, the massage parlor, their principal business is for massage. Massage Envy would be one that would be standalone, and basically their principal service is massage. So would they be prohibited at some point? Should they close up shop? Maybe. And I know that's not what was intended. However, I'm not sure how else to regulate it to include massage parlors and not include, you know, even your ones that are totally legitimate.
Well, the totally legitimate, I mean, they're licensed massage therapists
Right.
compared to the unlicensed ones. So, I mean, there is a difference.
Well, believe it or not, they'll keep a licensed or someone with a license.
To be able to meet that
The
definition.
illegitimate
Yeah, but you would
ones
just
will.
say it's can only be performed by license.
Well, they say that now, but it doesn't always happen.
So which of you are going to go and monitor to make sure?
I mean, the
Sounds
state
like you
has
don't.
requirements
I'm not
that
gonna
can only be
participate in
done by
that
licensed
conversation.
folks, so.
I'll go to the pawn shop.
I'm going to hang out the video arcade.
Oh, my gracious.
Yeah, let me ask a super question, just like going back to Joe's question about the video arcade. Does that all of a sudden mean Montana's has to register as a video arcade, or?
No, it would only come into play if Montana's were to close and someone else would want to open up and include all of them.
Oh, okay.
I
I
mean,
guess
you know,
we'll
it's
never
not
allow
going to
Chuck E.
preclude
Cheese
anybody.
in our city then. Chuck E.
Yeah,
Cheese has
Chuck
a
E.
lot more than
Cheese.
5 video
Yeah.
Yeah,
arcades.
they do.
Yeah.
You've been there before?
That's why you now wear a bow tie.
That's right.
I get it now. I get it.
Chucky?
And he does too, that's right.
It all comes very
All
clear.
comes around.
So I guess we just have to,
What's defined, just to close that loop, what's defined in OCGA 161235 is what makes an actual device a bona fide amusement game. So basically, it's defining what a game of chance is. So we'll look to see if there's anything with respect to that magic number of 5. But what's
Yeah.
defined in 161235
Okay.
is
All right.
what a game of chance is.
Sure.
I had a feeling we had to come up with a number.
With people like,
Doesn't mean you
with
get
people
something
like
back
Bert
out
and
of it.
Ken around, we
Yeah.
may need more
I
Chuck
wouldn't
E.
call
Cheeses
video
around,
games
so.
a chance.
Yeah,
You
back
did,
then.
I need one closer than these. I can spend more
I don't
money
eat
there.
pizza,
Julie?
If they just serve Chick-fil-A, you'd be all set.
perhaps.
Lynn, quick question, and it does kind of go back to one that we looked at earlier, but just in looking at these definitions, it brought the question to mind.
Okay.
Back in the section where you were moving, or we are moving certain
Right.
categories from one to another, where in C2, it removed landscaping businesses. I'm going to assume that that doesn't mean that a business that met that definition couldn't still be in C2 because it would be a more intense, so it's not prohibiting
Right.
it from being in a C2 location.
Yeah, we only removed it because it was already stated in C1
So
and
it still
in the
allows
beginning,
it
I
in
believe.
C2. If it was
Yes.
more, let's just say if it was a more intense use, had more commercial vehicles, it was more of a quarry, it was whatever that form it would take.
Right. Well, it
council
states in C2, any use permitted in C1, and it's already permitted specifically
So by
in C1.
removing it from there doesn't
So
preclude it, that this,
right.
if there was a more intense use that, went above and beyond what was intended in AG1 or
Right.
C1, the recommendation could still be to put it in C2.
Everything you see in C1 is authorized in C2.
Correct, okay.
Right, they just felt it was redundant to restate it, so the
Thank you.
planning commission asked to remove it.
And then all those commercial businesses then, where that was defined as any two of these, that's now defining what those would be.
Right.
Okay. Thank you. I'm sorry, one other question. On page 22, just where you distinguish between landscape business and lawn service, beyond the definition, do those become similar when it relates to the zoning?
They can be similar. They're just
Okay, so
not
this is really
required
more
to be.
It's more definitional here than it is zoning related.
Right, right.
Is that correct? So you could have somebody that might define themselves as a lawn service, but they'd still have to meet the requirement that was put in place recently.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you so
I
much.
tell you, that was a lot of work that Lynn turned around fast.
Yes, thank
so,
you, Lynn.
That was one of those, she came and said, oh, no, the planning commission wants me to write a definition for everything. I said, well, that sounds like fun. And she locked herself in her office one day, and miraculously, we had definitions. Good work.
Thank you. All right, the last one is real easy. What we have done is basically eliminated roadside bending from C1 and C2. So that's, and roadside bending is what you would typically see as your furniture. You know, they're supposed to permit, but assuming they have a permit, a roadside bending permit, be those folks who have a big truck and say, you know, they've got this furniture for sale, or
Elvis
Velvet Elvis.
Yep, Elvis. And
Those types of things, you know, artwork for sale by the side of the road, those kinds of things. And we're prohibiting those from C1 and C2 by making this change. So this one is a lot easier than the last few that we've
And those
looked
aren't
at.
allowed in AG1.
No,
So we're not suddenly saying that Elvis posters can be in AG1, did you?
no. Unless there are any other questions,
Questions
I think
on that?
that's the end of what I had. Make sure.
End of our agenda.
Okay, that's fine. We'll make the note. Okay.
So it's not cause
That'll still catch the Chuck E. Cheese.
Okay. Okay. So 10 or 15? All right.
Okay. Anybody else have anything else they want to add? Or not? We can adjourn. Thank you all.